Greg Braille,
I'm here.
Bill Burton,
Here.
Tony Carrasco,
Here.
In-Yang Cho, not here yet. Larry Klein,
Here.
Nadia Nayak,
Here.
Keith Reckdahl,
Here.
Dave Shen,
Here.
Carrie Templeton.
Here.
There you go. Thank you.
Awesome. Great. So first things first, staff updates. Do we have anything from staff?
Yeah, I just, Philip Cammy, Chief Transportation Official here. Sorry, I'm just getting ready to drive my son home. So I'll just make this really, really brief. But just wanted to note that on Monday, the city, the Palo Alto City Council adopted a resolution opposing the VTA Measure B 10-year outlook or base scenario, as it's called. So I just wanted to note that that's something that County Supervisor Joe Simidian had circled last week following a meeting with involving all of the different cities and county.
Right.
So
Awesome.
with that, if anybody has any interest to look back on the council agenda or any would like any additional information, I'm available for questions or comments.
Great. Ex-Cappers, does anyone have any questions on that in particular?
Yeah, what is the practical impact of that action?
Sorry, assuming I can get unmuted here. The impact is to be determined. So as right now, there hasn't been any formal action. So, right now, there's been an item that was an informational only item that VTA said was for discussion purposes that was providing it, their 10-year outlook for the Measure B funds. As I, mentioned, I think at our last meeting or discussed a bit briefly in our last meeting. The Palo Alto City Council essentially took a stance, an official stance of opposition, and the resolution essentially asks for them to, for the VTA board, when they're looking at things, to first reject that that base scenario as it is going to be presented to them, I believe tomorrow, and also for them to balance all the programs, all the different funding programs.
Who's behind that proposal? Do you know?
I'm sorry, behind the original proposal by
No,
VTA?
behind the proposal to redirect VTA funding.
So I'm sorry, but are you talking about to redirect the VTA funding to BART? Or
Yes.
are you talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm not sure if that's VTA staff or BART. So that's a good question. But it is coming from VTA staff. And just so you know, their argument is that they're not planning, or their argument was not that they're planning to redirect funding, but that they just haven't figured out where they're going to put all the funding. But the reality is that they front loaded the BART funding so much that there's not enough funding left available to fund all the other programs.
And this is,
That makes sense.
Philip, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is part of the budget fight that really begins in earnest in February, because they have to have everything ready for their, I think it's their May budget, right? And so the real negotiating and horse trading happens in February, and this is supposed to be the kind of the starting point, but it's not a great start.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly correct. So I think this was meant to, I don't know if VTA staff anticipated that this would be hit with such opposition as it is, but clearly it's got quite a few. I think we heard from the county supervisor, the meeting with all of the mayors and city council members and all that is people are very upset about this, not just in Palo Alto. So fairly united. Just noting that that of course San Jose and the cities that are really connected to the BART project more directly are probably going to be more in favor of it.
Well, Phil, let me give you a political analysis. Philip is being very polite and appropriately. So this is a long-standing fight. We start with the premise, not with the fact, that San Jose has a little bit more than half of the population of Santa Clara County. And they thus have a lot of political clout, and particularly since none of the other 14 cities come close to San Jose's population. San Jose's leaders for a long time, like 15, 20 years, have had this dream of making downtown San Jose into a real downtown for a city, appropriate for a city that has more than 1 million people population. That's the driving force behind bringing BART to San Jose and bringing it in a very, very down there to downtown San Jose in a very expensive manner. Previous sales tax measures for transit have been rated to when the BART expansion has gone over budget. So in the negotiations for Measure B, language was imposed on the San Jose people that if they really wanted the support from the rest of the county, particularly the vote-heavy North County, they had to have some real tight restrictions, which apparently aren't tight enough, to make sure that other parts of the county got money out of the sales tax increases, and it didn't all go to BART. And this is just the latest effort, of which there have been many, for the San Jose folks to try to raid the sales tax money to make sure that BART ultimately comes to downtown San Jose somewhere in the lifetime of kids who are presently 5 years old.
I think that's our official mission. Okay, anybody else? So I did want to raise two things. So one is we did discuss, Larry and I discussed with staff about when are we expecting XCAP's report to go to council? So we are currently targeting for February 8th meeting, which what that means is that our report would have to, be submitted, be finalized and everything by January 25th. So that is the ultimate goal that we are all working towards. So I wanted to make you guys aware of that. Philip and Ripon, I guess more Philip. I did have a question. We have been working hard over the Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll now be doing so over the Christmas and New Year holiday as well. But one of the things that is hard when managing this many chapters and whatnot is getting formatting correct and getting all these graphics put in. And I went back and looked and saw that the Blue Ribbon Task Force, the IBRIC group, actually was able to hire a copy editor at the end that they were able to use to be able to pull together the graphics and the pagination and all of that sort of stuff. I know that the budget is super tight, but I'm wondering if and I'm going to go out on a limb here, ex-cappers, and anyone feel free to raise your hand if you're not with me, but I would like to request on behalf of all ex-cappers that we get some assistance if at all possible. And if Philip, if you could take it maybe to Ed to see if there is any possibility of being able to hire somebody to at least help us with the final formatting so that we can get it done on time. My biggest thing is not just getting it done on time, but making this report legible and usable after 2 years worth of work and this many millions of dollars. I want this to look professional and not to say that this group isn't trying to work as professional as possible, but it'd be nice to get some help with our graphics and pages and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I will say that, as you know, our budget is very, very tight, and we've
Yes.
pretty much expended our budget, or nearly expended our budget. And that said, we don't have currently under contract anybody to help with that type of work in our department. That doesn't mean that there isn't in other departments. So I will look into it and check and see, perhaps maybe the Office of Communications might be able to help us with this. So I'll look into that and I will report back.
Great. I actually called one of the official co-chairs of the IBRIC committee and spoke with him today. So he was kind enough to tell me that they were able to find someone sort of last minute. I do have a lead on somebody if you want someone. if the communications office can't do it. In terms of funding, I will point out that XCAP studies to date have been funded out of the other bucket of Measure B money that was used to pay basically for all the AECOM work. And that, I believe, is if it's not annually, it might be quarterly. So a question of like, it's almost like using our benefits. When we start in January, do we get new benefits? And is there any bit of money that we might be able to squeeze out of that bucket? So I'll just throw that out to you as a suggested place to look.
Yeah, so that budget is considered our only fund source for all of the XCAP related consultant work.
Yeah.
So AECOM and everything like that. Connor, stop. Sorry, my son wants me to be driving right now. So yeah, so I'm not sure that our budget has any remaining funding in it that isn't allocated directly to our consultant work.
Okay.
So that's a real question, and I'm not sure. I will look into that though, and I will look into the possibility of getting some help. When you started speaking about this, I thought you guys were going to be asking for your paychecks. So
TBD. We haven't all agreed on exactly the amount, but I'm sure we'll be coming to.
Yeah, what paychecks? Can we
Exactly.
apply for back pay? I got
That's right,
and
back pay.
vacation benefits. I got 3 years of that coming to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I will look into, and see if there's anything we can do to help with that. I appreciate, I think it's a reasonable request. I just will say that noting that we're in a challenging time financially.
Yes, I appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. All right. With that, I think we can move on to oral communications. And we've got, this is a time for members of the public to talk to us about something that is not on the agenda. So today we're going to be continuing to edit this report. And so if you are a member of the public who's watching and you would like to speak on an item not on this agenda, then now would be a time to digitally raise your hand and we can call on you. I see 3 attendees. Thank you for hanging in there. I'll give you guys a couple of seconds. Okay, I don't see anything. So I think we don't have any members of the public who are looking to speak. So we can now move on to XCAP member updates and working group updates. So this is more not the meat of the reports, but more the how's it going? How's your chapter organization happening? Logistics, that sort of stuff. So I'll open it up to XCAPers and see, does anybody want to jump in? How's it going?
Well, I mean, we'll get to the chapters, but I feel a lot better about the monster chapter that discusses Meadow and Charleston than I did 2 weeks ago. I wistfully wish that we could recommend something to the council other than saying, here's a whole lot of information, you figure it out. And maybe as we edit, something will come to us.
Yep. Yeah, I think there's so a couple of things that I know. Is there anybody else before I speak on this? Was there anybody else who wanted to talk about their section or?
Well, I'd like to talk about the report in general, since like everybody else, I've been reading all the other sections besides ones I've written. I'd like to reinforce Nadia's point about needing a copy editor, and more than just a copy editor, because what I've seen is a lot of redundancy. And this is not pointing a finger at anyone in particular. It just is we're all writing these sections in isolation, and we all have this urge to get all the information in. I think we better be very realistic about when we have to basically close the content and start doing revisions and streamlining. We have to have a harsh schedule for that, or we'll never get there by the deadline you mentioned earlier.
Yep. And I think to be fair, as you said, the repetition is coming from the fact that we're each working on our own segment, right? So we're like, oh, I have to define this because it's the first time I've said it. I think once we start to actually look at
Yeah.
the chapters all together, we'll be able to say, as described on page X, here's what passing tracks refer
but
to, and not have to keep
I'm just
doing
going to argue that based on my own experience, it's going to take more time than people probably realize, given the number of separate authors.
that. Yes, hence my begging for a copy editor.
More than just a copy editor, but
Yeah. I will confess to this group, I am hoping to get my 18-year-old daughter to try to help me. That might take some parental bribing on my part, but I'm hoping to try to grab someone who has no idea what a grade separation is and rope them into reading this.
I can tell you that a new set of car keys might go a long way.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of what she said, Phil. So, okay, I did contact Tony and Carrie, and so we should have some discussion about where this fits in, because I realized we didn't have a spot for Tony's alternative for the roundabout at Embarcadero that XCAP moved forward but then council shut down. And so wasn't sure if we consider that a discarded alternative, because I think the discarded alternatives was really things that were discarded before XCAP got to deliberate on them. I still feel like it might fall into that category unless folks have some strong objections.
Yeah, Nadia, can I make a quick point about that discarded alternatives?
Yeah.
You mentioned a few minutes ago that we want to write a report that will work for somebody who's never been to an XCAP meeting.
Yep.
And for people like that, the distinction between something discarded prior to XCAP and something discarded by XCAP, that is a fine point that may be lost. As far as these people are concerned, these are all discard alternatives. We may need to define subdivision between prior and post creation of XCAP.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think it's kind of contemporary, right? Folks that are reading this now can be following along. Folks that are reading this in a year or two, it's all going to be defunct. So I think I still feel like that works as nomenclature, but open to hearing what others feel.
I just think for the intended audience, that's a distinction that will be lost on them.
Okay. Anybody else have thoughts on calling it discarded alternatives? Or yeah, Keith.
Part of it is that this is showing what we did. And the things that were discarded before we started, we shouldn't expect the same detail and the same analysis. And so I think the distinction in that sense is important, but I agree with your big picture.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely, Keith. We have to define what we've worked on, but still the fact that some alternative got discarded prior, people may be aware. We should at least say these were discarded prior. These are the ones that XCAP discarded, and here's why.
But isn't that what we're doing? I mean, the title of the chapter is Ideas Discarded Before XCAP Began. So, hey, XCAP didn't get to hear about the citywide tunnel or simple underpasses, right? That's what we're saying.
But we might say, but somebody might say, what about the South Palo Alto only tunnel? Wasn't that also discarded?
And that one is that's in the South Palo Alto section, and it's described and explained how
it's harder on the reader.
Okay.
I want to chime in here too.
Yeah.
I have to draw the line here. I think that the scope creep is really we've already expanded the scope to talk about things that happened before. I'd be concerned about adding more. Also, what the purpose of this is. Did the CAP do any of this documentation? Like, can we just refer to that?
This is something that XCAP, so this was when we asked for new alternatives back in October, November of last year. Tony put forth a concept for Embarcadero, and then there was the Elizabeth's concept and the Mike's concepts. We as XCAP all voted to take all of those to council, and then council voted to move forward with 3 and did not decide to move forward with Tony's idea. So this happened.
I get that, but exactly, it happened during XCAP. So I don't know why we want to. It's fine to have our little 2 or 3 page reference of what happened before to get you caught up, but I think I don't think we can add more to that. I think it's fine what Phil said about how we label things that were discarded before, which is what we've done, and I think each chapter is going to have what we discarded during XCAP. Is that right?
Yeah, and all I'm saying is we don't have anywhere written about Tony's concept that we took to council but then didn't move.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but that's not before XCAP. So
Right. Okay, so you're saying you're making the argument that it should not go in this section, it can go elsewhere.
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead, Tony.
No, I was just going to say I agree with what Carrie said.
Okay. So then it should go into the section that Dave and Inyoung were working on.
Are you talking about the
Churchill?
original section or the current one that I'm working on? Because the original one, I actually put in a bunch of these that we had gone through and talked about, and then the results of that voting. That was a few revisions back, though.
Right. No, I think we have to have, well, question, where do you guys think it goes? In my, we either have things that happened before XCAP or things that happened once XCAP started. And so not sure where it fits, because it's kind of this in between of, well, we brought it to council, council didn't decide to move forward with it, so XCAP didn't review it.
I think it goes in the section on Churchill.
Okay.
I agree.
It gets mentioned, quickly discarded because it was quickly discarded.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be long. I mean,
And we
this is-
voted on it too.
Right.
No, all we voted on was to say it was worthy of additional study if the council agreed and the council did not agree.
Right.
Carrie asked a question that I think is important. Did CAP do any wrap-up documentation?
No,
Okay.
no, we got rolled right into XCAP.
Yeah, we were kind of not allowed to have opinions.
Yes.
Nadia,
So
I could write 2 sentences on that.
great, awesome. Yeah, whatever paragraph you want to put in, it can even include a photograph if you want.
Okay.
Whatever, but you now have Dave's and Yin Young's kind of chapter on Churchill. So just kind of figure out where it might make logical sense to put it in there.
Okay, I will ask Dave.
Yeah. Okay. Another kind of sectiony thing was I pulled out a timeline. And we've distributed to the group a draft timeline. So it's kind of a master timeline that goes, it starts with 2008 because I frankly pulled it from some other staff presentation, some of it, and then it goes all the way to present. And it is sourced as much as possible. So that's also helpful for people looking for stuff. I'm thinking it's going to be something that probably goes in the appendix somewhere as a reference thing, but I just wanted to call it out. And if, as you guys are doing your sections, you come at like some critical milestone or something that you want to make sure is put into the timeline, you can check it against the existing timeline. And if not, we can feel free to add to it. But just make sure to kind of note those for me so we can keep a running list of what's on there. I'm not assuming anyone had time to sort of review that timeline, and it's quite lengthy. So another thing was Larry and I, in working on the executive summary, which we'll talk about in a minute, but you'll notice there's sort of the executive summary, and then there's a second section, which is, what did I call it? Findings, it's got some long title. Findings, future areas of studies, and additional recommendations. And I think this goes to what Greg was saying. So how do we have a section of the report that's useful for policymakers on how they ought to move forward? Larry and I had a little bit of discussion on this, but and it may become more obvious as we finish writing. But the question was, if you're a policymaker, you sit down and read this report, you read maybe the executive summary. And if we have the recommendations right up front, some of the recommendations are so technical or need some explanation that you don't have enough knowledge to understand what they are yet. So there's an argument to be made that you have them at the beginning of the report. There's another argument to be made like, once we're done telling you about everything, then we're going to have a summary at the end. But the idea being that there will be, I think of it as this kind of old school exams where you could tear out an entire section of stuff and take it with you and say, okay, I'm only working on this piece. You know, that would be where the policymakers could kind of tear out whatever it's going to be, a final chart, a list, whatever, of stuff that is the kind of what they need to move forward with.
I think the executive summary needs to be an executive summary. So some of the recommendations we have are really detailed, you know, re-examine the width of the bicycle path along Park Boulevard and determine whether or not the Caltrain vertical curve standards can be amended because the trains are a different height. That's like really deep technical stuff that should go in the report, but it's not going to help council at all. I think we also have high-level recommendations, like we'd like to understand better the costing of the various options. We'd like to understand, you know, better the noise. We probably want to do more traffic studies, right? You know, we need to understand whether there's going to be 4 tracks in Palo Alto. You know, those are, like, to me, you know, bullets right up front. And the other stuff, you know, 2/3 of our recommendations are really detailed stuff that isn't going to matter until they drill down to a particular alternative, or whoever does it drills down to an alternative.
So maybe we have recommendations that are for policymakers and recommendations that are for technical folks.
Yeah.
So one format I saw was the rail corridor report at the end of theirs had basically almost like a spreadsheet, and it had different columns and they had different policies and how their recommendations fit in with policies. We could have something similar, but it's kind of, you know, high level policymaker stuff and then another section for the technical stuff, but it all becomes one list. And we can still include that list in verbiage and actual words in the executive summary. But it still also could be as a list format. How does that sound?
Makes sense.
Okay. Did anyone come across any other things that we missed that we didn't really discuss?
So Nadia?
Yeah.
I thought Carrie's and also staff's matrix was very useful in how we decided or the information that led us to decide the recommendations that we came to. And I didn't see how those 2 matrices were in the summary or anywhere else.
So the matrix is the matrices that are the ones that were done by AECOM. Those are going to be in the appendix. The stuff that we did with Carrie's dynamic matrix was really supposed to be more for XCAP's deliberations.
Yes, that's okay.
And so I don't really know how that could be incorporated or should be incorporated.
Okay.
But I'm open to hearing suggestions.
I would, this is Carrie. Thank you, Tony. I'd say that we didn't fully review and capture, we didn't finish the process. It would be hard to include everything in there. If we did want to use it, we could do a, you know, a subgroup or something that could go through and work and make sure that we, at least several of us, agree on what those are before presenting it to the whole XCAP for approval to include. But unless we do something like that, I think it's probably too controversial unless we actually agree on what the items should be.
I think as long as the staff's matrix is in there as an appendix, I think that should work.
Yeah, any of the documents that were created by AECOM will be in there for sure. Yeah, and I agree with Carrie. I think, I mean, if time and energy didn't matter, sure. But I think, you know, at this point, it's just more work, and I'm not sure it gets us anything.
I saw one omission, and I'm not sure if it's on purpose, and that is the recommendation to have an urban designer, someone who understands the public nature of these kinds of spaces that we're going to be creating. I didn't see that in any of your summary or recommendations.
In which section, Tony? Are you talking about in the Churchill section, in the South Palo Alto section, in the dissenting opinion section?
Yeah, it originally came in the document we wrote on the viaduct, which I wasn't able to fully incorporate into the chapter we have today. And the idea was, these are public amenities we're talking about, and I think a lot of the reactions to the elevated options were along the lines of, I know it's going to be ugly, I just know it. And we haven't given them any opportunity to think about what it actually might look like.
Mm-hmm.
And the same with Churchill. There are several opportunities there too.
So what I can do is I'll put a placeholder for right now in just the general recommendations section, which we're going to review in a minute, which talks about kind of high level things, geotechnical work, new bike ped connections, and we can put, urban design help, and we can add to that later and have a discussion in that part. Because I think it's not specific to just one alternative. I think you mean it as an overarching thing.
Right.
To be able to tell
right.
the story.
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Did we miss anything? Yeah, Inyan.
Well, hi. So the urban designer going to do something about viaduct underneath the usage of underneath of the viaduct? Is that the focus, or
I think,
in general, everything else?
Tony, I think what you meant was just that we should, when we kind of look at these designs, we should have an urban designer help so that they don't look we don't present the ugliest version possible every time. Is that what you mean? Or
That's what I mean. I don't mean just under the viaduct. Is in general the idea of landscape and how the place might feel to residents and traveler people who use the space.
Right, so the Churchill underpass, for instance, the Churchill undercrossing, for instance,
Yes.
or the underpass or the hybrid would all benefit from some attention.
Yes.
Anybody else? Okay. I think because we have this as its own agenda item, I have to take public comment if anybody has public comment on the member updates and working group updates. If there's any members of the public that are watching that want to comment specifically on that, you can do so now and raise your hand digitally. Okay, seeing none, we can move on to number 5, writing and editing a final report. Woo. So again, thanks to everybody. I know that there was a lot of work done over the break that we had. And so I think to Greg's point, I do feel much better about where we are right now versus where we were 2 weeks ago. There's a lot more words on a page, so it's a little better. I was going to propose starting with the executive summary, partly because it's the shortest. But I recognize a lot of these materials came out very late. And so wanted to, is there anyone who hasn't been able to read the executive summary yet? And it's okay to say you haven't, because what I'm going to do is provide a good 5 minutes or so for us to kind of read through. So do we need to take that time now, or was everyone able to read it in advance? Yes, I'm hearing yes, we need 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Yeah, I just scanned it.
Okay, perfect. All right. I'm going to give us at least 5 minutes on the clock. I'm actually going to, since I wrote it, I'm going to go get a glass of water while you guys are reading it, but I'll be right back. But we'll start again in 5 minutes. You guys can read that. Thanks.
Everybody should be muted.
Oh, I'm on mute.
Okay, how are we doing? Anyone need another minute or two? Yeah, okay.
So in general, whatever process we're using to make the PDFs is not working, because what's on Nadia's screen is vastly more readable. There's clearly a font mismatch with the PDF conversion, and I don't know if we can diagnose that, but it's worth thinking about.
That's a good, I had the same problem. And typically what I do is I read the soft copies instead of reading the version that that Sarah is posting. I guess the question that we have is, how is it going? Because the members of the public are supposed to be able to see our comments. So that's why when it gets converted like that, it has that weird, you know, it's much smaller.
Yeah, that's fine. It's the font. In this one, the font sizing is clearly off. Letters are spaced haphazardly. They overlap each other. I don't know how to describe it. If you look at the PDF, you'll see what I mean.
Okay.
So there's no way we can share a Google Doc version of it, because then the formatting is preserved, the fonts are preserved, view only, a link. There's really no way to do that at all.
No, that's what Molly said.
Well, Google Docs and Word can make PDFs, but it's like there's a font problem going on here.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's like crashing letters, like that
Yeah.
and up there that's scrolling off right now. And
Yeah, and this is actually, the other one's even worse.
yeah, and some of the fonts are changing too. Like they go from
Anybody
sans serif
understand?
to serif.
Does anyone know why that is? I mean, do I have any?
I have some theories.
Yeah, exactly.
Any suggestions?
Well, I think we
Have
might.
you checked that the font you're using in the original document is a universally available font?
Great question. How would one figure that out?
Well,
I actually don't think so. It's something, the one I'm using at least was one that we found from a previous report, and it was beautiful and stuff. So I've continued to use it. It's called Proxima.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
think
what I've
it's
been using.
Yeah, so I don't think that's available in the Microsoft Word or whatever it is that.
Or
Yeah,
however,
so-
it's not available on whoever's computer is doing the PDF.
That's right.
Yeah,
version.
well, there are a lot of PDF creation tools, and some are more equal than others, in my experience.
Okay, so maybe the easiest thing would be to have Sarah, who usually does this for us, make sure she's downloaded the Proxima Nova, and then that way.
Or she could just tell us what font to use, and we'll all just use that font.
Or we could all flip to Arial, which everybody has.
Sure. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna put on here.
I think the just so you know, I think the city font is Calibri.
Okay. But we're
I
not
can
the
confirm
city.
that for you. Yeah, that's true.
I'm
When
teasing.
do we combine these documents into one? I think the problem will solve itself then, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
But only after the copy editor's done their work.
The mythical copy editor we don't have yet.
Until then, it's going to be a nightmare.
Well, if people pick the correct formatting method, like they haven't manually done it, like change font size and that kind of thing, you pick H1, heading 2. If
Yeah.
you do it that way, then
Yeah.
everything will flip nicely. But if you
I went
haven't,
through and I tried to correct most of them. So I think we've done it for a lot of them. I've systematically been going through because that was something I learned just during this process. So I went through and changed all of the documents for myself. So let me make sure I'm on the right. We're editing here.
Yeah, I'll say I used Arial for mine, and it looks fine in the PDF. So
Okay. All right.
I'm
Well,
not worried about it.
Okay, then maybe the chairman needs to issue an edict that from now on, all
from
words,
now on, Arial 11 is our thing.
standard text font.
Yes. Okay. Too bad. I really liked Proxima Nova. I find it more legible, but okay.
Well, the nice thing about standards is there's so many to choose from.
Yes.
I'm sure Dave and Greg appreciate that point.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to do this now, but I will change font to Arial afterwards. I'm going to put Arial.
Nadia, if you want to reach out to me when you're doing that, I can help make sure you don't mess up the rest of the formatting at that time.
Great. That would be awesome. I will take any help I can get. Okay. All right. So substantive stuff. As you can see, we have sort of an executive summary and then we have the recommendations. I liked what Greg said about having kind of the executive summary, have the recommendations that are maybe for policymakers, and then we have a separate recommendation for technical folk. Does that sound like a change everyone kind of agrees with, having just read this?
I think Greg has a very good point here, because if we throw too much technical stuff in with the policy, we're going to have abandonment. People will just stop reading.
So would you call it like a technical summary?
I would call it technical issues or technical discussion. Well, for example,
like
the whole what?
I like that.
Yeah, the whole idea of what's the allowable maximum grade. That's a technical point that will be, aside from the fact that there is an issue, the rest of it will be lost on council members. That's my guess.
Yeah. So, for instance, in the South Palo Alto doc, Phil, you and Keith were going back and forth over whether the cover on the trench could be 800 feet long or 1,600 feet long. That's like really low level technical stuff.
You mean really high level?
In such a doc. Yeah.
I'm kidding. All right. Well, let's. So I hear that when we get to the part where we're going to talk about recommendations, and we'll try to parse those out, or we can come back when I come back with a second revision. I'll make a note here about that. Policymaker recommendations versus technical.
I had a comment.
Yeah.
When I scanned through this, it felt really, really long to be a summary. And I was thinking of ways to shorten it up.
Yep.
Like, does it really need the introduction parts and all this kind of thing? I mean, that is going to be in another part, I assume, after the summary, isn't it?
I mean, we have the chapter 1. Why do we need grades? We have an intro. Why do we need grade steps? And we have chapter 2. I think we tried to throw in, you know, a line or two here so that if somebody really doesn't read all of those things and you're a new policymaker 5 years from now, then at least you still get that dose of medicine. But I'm open to, you know, if we want to make it shorter.
Yeah, I guess well, there's that, and then there's also the back end too, which is all the findings. It's like,
Well, that's
wow,
going to
this-
move to a different section. So
Oh,
there's
okay.
there's a
Good.
yeah, there's a thing right here. It says this should be the end of the section for executive summary. This will be a second section. So this
Oh, I
document
thought it
is
was
really
notation.
like two
Thank you.
things. Yeah, no worries. Anybody else thoughts on, do we need this introduction part? Do we want to skip it and just leave it as the introduction that we already had?
I think the introduction's okay.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Okay.
I have a comment. So, you know, there are same things said differently in a different section, basically same content, but you know, it's just wordings are different. Doesn't that cause more, you know, confusion? So executive summary should be, you know, similar to what each chapter would say.
Okay.
You know, so maybe you go back and what each chapter says about certain things, and then maybe you should same
Okay.
tone or same wording, because you said this in a little, you know, one way, and then the other one is saying the same thing, and like, you know, person says, oh, is that different, right? So
Yeah, and I think what was just pointed out was we have yet to do the document rationalization, and that's what's behind underlying this discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Once we did the rationalization, I think some of these issues are going to fall out naturally.
So what I'm hearing, I hear what you're saying in Young, that it'd be good to just kind of repeat the key sentences here in the executive summary. But I'm also hearing Phil is like, once we're done taking out all the redundancies, we're going to know exactly which of the key sentences to put in here.
Yeah, and there's no easy, you got to start somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
okay.
So I think we need to accept the inevitable that there's going to be some redundancy for now, but just to get everything down, and then we'll squeeze the redundancy out through the rationalization process.
Mm-hmm.
That way, at least we can make some progress.
Do you want us to give like little wordsmithing feedback on this call or send them to you separately?
I think you can send the small wordsmithing things. There's a couple of ones that Larry and I certainly disagreed on, so I wanted to talk about it. But if there's anything substantive, like I really don't think we should include this line or whatever, that probably makes more sense, because I don't think we need to wordsmith during this meeting.
Well, it's things like the PTC is a commission, not a committee, for whatever reason.
Oh yeah,
And
no, that's fine.
the word inappropriate to describe the departure of our business and school people kind of leaves me with a weird feeling, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, okay, no, those are relevant. That's more than a typo, I think. So it's Transportation Commission, not committee. Okay, and then let's see.
Now, you and I talked about this, but the council added 6 people, not 5.
Yes, along with 6 additional representatives. Sorry, I did correct this thing somewhere else because I think I had written 9 and I fixed it to 8. So I fixed the 8. I forgot to fix the 6. So thank you. Okay, and then Carrie just mentioned something that I missed. Carrie, can you tell me what line it is?
I can, it's in that same thing. It's just look for the word inappropriate, Control F for inappropriate.
Oh, here it is.
No, but that's precisely the reason they gave.
I just wanted to check. It left me with a weird feeling because it's sort of abstract. But if that's, their words, then we should use it.
Yeah.
I mean, the school district felt that they should not participate in a decision-making process that was really the purview of the city council. And the Chamber of Commerce really said, we don't want our president on there because it may impact finances and so forth. So they felt it was, once again, inappropriate for her to participate.
But I think that the context you just added there is meaningful because inappropriate's a bit abstract and often really, really negative.
Okay.
We have a conflict between trying to keep things short in an executive summary and
It's fine. I just wanted to bring it up. If you're comfortable with it, then
oh, I'm comfortable with it.
that's fine.
I'm a little uncomfortable with saying that the Chamber of Commerce decided it was inappropriate. I didn't hear that. And
Oh, they said Judy had to resign, period.
yes, but they didn't say it was inappropriate.
Yeah, because, well,
Judy made some comments at the time before she left that indicated that she had her reasons. I don't think we want to get into too much of the dirty laundry, but they were in a public meeting.
Is
Well,
there a different word that we can use there?
Okay, PAOC and Chamber of Commerce decided that it was, how about just decided to not have their representatives participate?
Or to end their participation, to withdraw their participation, whatever.
Would that work?
Even if you change it from inappropriate to not appropriate, that has a little less baggage.
There you go.
I like that. How's that?
I think that's a good suggestion.
That works for me.
Okay.
One other comment, the Parks and Rec, I'm on here because I'm in Charleston Meadows, not because of Parks and Rec.
Oh, okay. That's good to know.
Yeah, because Prague and Mandir, they left.
Right.
Or Mandaria.
Yeah. A neighbor from Charleston Meadows. Oh. And I'll just take out Parks and Rec. Okay. Anybody else?
One other big picture thing is that the COVID, we went on quite a bit for COVID. And I looked at that first and said, we have like 6 paragraphs talking about COVID. But when I look at the details, that I don't see anything that's terrible. But the one thing that jumped out at me was the 3rd paragraph under COVID. It says engagement with key stakeholder groups has also suffered. That's true, but part of that was our own doing. And one of the big lessons learned for me for this is that we did not do a good enough job to actively get these stakeholders in. And they knew that stuff was going on, but we didn't actively pull them in. And that was a lesson learned for me. So
do we think we didn't pull them in? I mean, from a timeline perspective, the timelines sync up. In other words, when we just got we didn't get our newest designs until after COVID. We had already been quarantined for a while.
I think that we should. Should have been in earlier.
Okay. So we want to include a line that basically says some of this was.
I mean, this is accurate. It is suffered. I think it's totally accurate. But I think if you're putting together lessons learned, I think better outreach would be one. So I don't want to pin it all on COVID. Part of it is we didn't do a good enough job of making sure the outreach was successful.
And I think we have better outreach as that's in part of the suggestions that are coming later.
Okay.
We talk about trying to formalize a process with the bike community.
Okay. So anyway, we'll get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, I also have a more positive reaction to the virtual town hall than what's in here. It kind of made the virtual town hall sound like, yeah, they did a virtual town hall, but it wasn't very good. And actually, I think it was sort of a unique way to get people engaged who wouldn't necessarily, I mean, there are aspects of COVID that are better. The fact that people can participate in public meetings at home while they're having dinner with their kids versus having to go to City Hall and hang around until midnight is actually better. And I think the virtual town hall in some ways may have engaged a broader group of people than would have been able to show up for those meetings in person.
Okay. So is there any word in particular that you thought made it sound more negative that we could change, or I'm looking for suggestions? Because I mean, I hear you. I tried to say, you know, that we were able to move online and that got a lot more people. But what's difficult to say is whether what was communicated to them is understood. And so, like, the biggest one, for example, is, you know, the Meadow Charleston underpass alternatives looked as if they were as baked as the others, and they weren't. And there wasn't really a way in that virtual town hall to understand that. So if there's a word in particular that is making this sound more negative, or if you have,
Well,
I'm trying to think what it is. I don't know.
okay.
I think it's a question of trade-offs. It's not so much one is better than the other. It's that there are advantages, disadvantages to each format, but we did not have a choice of formats.
Right.
So here are the pluses of the new format, and here are the negatives. We should
Yeah,
call.
and so I wrote it as the pandemic has also impacted the ability of the city to conduct traditional town hall meetings. Although the staff and consultants were eventually able to move to virtual town hall online, it was held over the summer over 2 weeks, engaged a higher number of residents than is typical for an in-person town hall. So positive.
And that's a clear benefit.
Yeah.
Okay.
However, difficult to determine whether this platform was an effective way to clearly communicate and have a discourse about the trade-offs of the various alternatives.
And that's an issue.
Yeah.
So my opinion is that it's probably was not as effective as face-to-face. And if you can say that.
Yeah, that's what I think the second sentence tries to say.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So
Yeah, I agree with Tony. The only thing is we didn't have a choice about
we
it.
didn't have a choice, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
So we have to
did what we could with what we had. Yeah.
We have to embrace the inevitable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think we should, I think that Greg's point is well taken, and I think that.
Yeah, I don't know how to
I don't
fix
think
it.
there's any point in.
So I'll make.
What I was going to suggest that we try to fix it right here, but we take it offline with.
Yeah, okay, cool,
Yep.
thanks.
Okay.
I've got it for rewrites.
Yeah, cool, thanks.
Okay. I'll just.
Did I
mark
have
it.
also I want to state that it was for more than 2 weeks, so it was for we extended it all the way up to 4 weeks. So just want to note.
Oh, okay, great. I'll change that then.
And if you want to add that we received good response from the residents, but however, you know, like some of these are the challenges that you were stating, may be able to both is that it reached while there was some communications
Oh, Ripon, I'm having a terrible time trying to hear you. Ripon, if you can hear me, if you want to text me.
Sorry, I'll send you a note later then.
Okay, great. Yeah, text me your thoughts on that.
Okay,
Love to hear.
thanks.
So to the point of, is it too long of a discussion about COVID? I think what's important about this section is that the reader right away understands that this is happening in the sort of middle of the pandemic. And we're trying to explain what our current situation is as best we understand it in this moment. And that takes some verbiage. And I think if we shorten it, we're missing really having the reader understand the point in time in which we're reporting out what's happening. Because the world could look very different 9 months from now when someone else is reading this. So
the last paragraph on page 2.
I would say that we.
Oh, my question about the X cap was not asked to focus. That seems kind of out of place. That wasn't really much a COVID thing. That's
that.
Sorry, go ahead, Larry. Now I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not mute. As to the length of the executive summary, my assumption in working on this with Nadia is that this is going to be the only thing that many of the council members or future readers are going to read. So that it's always a trade-off, but I don't think this is really very long. So you always want to see if you can tighten it up, but keep in mind that's the goal, is that, or the background, that is that assume that the reader, this is the only thing that this reader is going to read.
So Keith, what I heard you say, so this sentence is actually supposed to, it's part of the paragraph above where funding is
Keith?
being discussed. Yeah, Larry, I heard you. I agree with what you're saying. Keith, this sentence belongs to the one up top. Does that make sense to you? Whoops, in the context of that?
Yeah. Does it add anything that needs to be here?
I
guess.
I'm fine to take it out.
Well, I guess the previous one was talking about this funding, and you're basically saying we had all these funding problems, but it's not our problem, that's council's problem. So maybe it's okay.
I think there's a section later on about how significant and expensive this project is. So maybe these ideas belong in that section.
Well, it's to Larry's point, right? This may be the only thing they read. So even though we all know that we talk about this later, if this is the only time that a council member reads it, then this is all they're going to get on that.
Nadia, I think it implies that we did not consider costs, and we did consider costs in most of our deliberations. And Larry and the consultants talked about financing feasibility. So we did, in some ways, consider financial aspects of when we made our decisions, when we make our recommendations.
Okay, but this is really talking about how to finance the projects, not the cost itself.
I understand. I mean, we did consider finance too, right?
Well, Tony, not really. I mean, we can, let's put it this way. I would hate to have council turn to us and say, what do you recommend for funding this project? Because we couldn't do that.
Yeah, I agree.
True. Yes. Okay.
We can only say we were sensitive to cost. That's why we killed the South Palo Alto tunnels, for example. And the actual mechanism,
they're financially not feasible.
Yeah,
well, difficult.
Let's put it this way: if we had unlimited pot of money, we might have kept them. But we are aware that no such pot exists.
Right.
So that are where we are. But specific measures like tax measures or bonds, that's way beyond what we were asked to do, or I think are qualified to do, given the current XCAP membership.
Yes, it says how to finance them is not our charge. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and hopefully this is an appetizer, right? So people say that are like, oh, they've talked about that. I'm going to go turn to page something or another and go read about it.
And they won't find anything there.
Well, they will. They'll actually, there is the entire section that I wrote, which is about, hey, these projects used to be funded out of, county measures. And they're probably going to have to do things differently because now Caltrain needs to do this on a broader scale. And the Caltrain's contemplating looking at different funding structures. So that's what they're going to read.
But 3 years from now, or 5, or even 2, we have no idea what the economy is going to look like. We have no idea whether or not Biden's going to pass a relief measure that includes state and local governments. So we really have no insight. Not that anybody's, we certainly don't. And
I don't. Yeah, I
mean,
agree.
Honestly, and we don't want to we don't want to overpromise.
Okay, but I still think the sentence stands. Does that work for everybody?
It can stand so far, but it doesn't take them where they need to go.
Yeah, I can't take them there, Phil. I ain't got no money.
Nadia, can I ask one request?
Yeah.
As I read this over, I think that last paragraph is fine. I think you need to add one sentence that says basically, as a result, even though COVID affected the finances, XCAP did not plan in any compensation for that or whatever, that, because what you were saying in the previous paragraph is saying that XCAP, that the city has a bunch of financial issues. And then the next one is saying that we didn't focus on finance. We should explicitly tie it back to the previous paragraph saying, as a result, we didn't plan any recovery or compensation for the COVID-related financial issues.
Well, I saw this as something different. I saw this as XCAP remains convinced that while the time frame is being pushed out, these projects should need attention. And so Palo Alto should work on trying to, work on these, continue to do work on those. And then what I'm saying here is XCAP wasn't asked how to finance these projects, but we did review how they've been historically funded and what funding sources may emerge. And maybe it's not sources may emerge, but it's actually the funding structures may change. I think that's actually the more accurate thing, because what I'm saying is we used to only do this as county tax measures because they were basically road projects. Moving forward, this is something that we need as a state to get Caltrain as a system to work. And so their funding structure, doing county tax measures is not how you're going to be able to fund the remaining grade separations moving forward. It's just not going to work. And so they're going to have to look at different structural changes.
Nadia, I think the problem is this sentence doesn't belong in the COVID section.
Okay.
Because our direction not to focus on finances was true before COVID and it's true after COVID.
Okay.
So I think we need to find a better place for it.
All right, I'll just mark it then as placement. Okay. All right, we'll come back to that.
I have a question. So the most, like for my mind, the most important thing about COVID impact is that, people have questions of a future needs on commuting, Caltrain,
Mm-hmm. And so that's here in this sentence.
And then second is that, like you have to defer decision because of it, right? And which I didn't think we should, because we decide to continue with our train going forward.
So sorry, you're saying
we didn't, that was the, the general community, few concerns that community has, but we didn't really respond to it, right? Because we said we continue with our agenda because it's uncertainty. Do we need to include that we didn't, there were concerns, but we didn't?
Well, so what we put in here was that even though there's been a dramatic drop of ridership and there's a fiscal crisis across multiple transit agencies, XCAP remains convinced that while the time frame for the need for grade separations will likely be pushed out by a few years, the importance of these projects necessitates continuous work. So we may not need them immediately, but we all agree that when Caltrain starts to run more trains, we're going to have a problem and we're going to need grade separations. And hopefully that's what that says clearly.
Oh, okay. Thanks. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good and important paragraph to get in there.
Do we think it says that well enough, or do we need to tweak it?
I think it says it well.
Okay. We'll get another round at this so we can think about it more. Okay, here's the kind of general findings overview section.
I have one comment here. In the middle of this paragraph, with only 7 places to cross, you see that on the right-hand side?
Yeah.
Can you say for 7 places for vehicles to cross?
Yeah. And I noticed that the passing tracks issue is something that comes up again and again and again. And we actually, we talked about that in chapter 2, I think it is, which I had originally called community context, but I think we started calling it influencing factors is what we agreed to last time. So I think whenever we refer about passing tracks, once we have some page numbers, we'll go back and say we talked about the passing track issue on page yada yada, so we can shorten this a bit. That'll help get rid of some of the repetition, I hope.
Nadia, I think we should keep it like it is, and I think it should be a really big priority to oppose 4 tracks now, as soon as right now, I think we should be opposing 4 tracks, mainly because Palo Alto has a very narrow right of way compared with Mountain View or Redwood City too, I believe. So the south side, maybe you can put 4 tracks, but it's a huge imposition and a very different project. So I think the more you can talk about it and ask council to focus on opposing 4 tracks.
Well, so we called it out as something that has to be resolved. I didn't take a position that XCAP is saying that they're against it, because frankly, Caltrain has already made a board decision of how they're going to deal with the requests that they get, and it's something the city can try to oppose, but it's not necessarily something we have any purview over, right? That's going to be a political thing. It's not we technically don't get to tell Caltrain you can't put 4 tracks here.
So the PDF copy of this section has some controversial comments about how most people in XCAP don't agree with HSR that somebody was disputing.
Yes.
Are we just leaving that out?
No, those are up for discussion.
Okay,
and I just
they're
realized
not in what you're showing us.
Yeah,
but they are in the
thank you for
PDF.
that. I made a copy of the Google Doc so that I could edit it live, and I'm noticing, yes, that those comments didn't cross over. So if someone wants to tell me where those are, because they didn't come through, then
I don't think actually, go back to the constraint section. Actually, there's a paragraph that is not present in what we're looking at. Many XCAP members believe that HSR will never get to the peninsula, and so on and so forth. I don't know.
Huh.
I would personally rather not say that, but yeah.
Well, you just brought up an issue. I'm wondering, did I copy the wrong document? Larry, did you cut anything out? Did you edit at all? Did you edit that paragraph out?
No, I wrote it.
It's
Yeah.
highlighted in red in the PDF, so I wonder if it was just commented or if it's like a suggestion or something. I couldn't hear what was
They
going
were
on.
just comments, not suggestions. Is there a keyword I can look for, or is the paragraph missing altogether?
That sentence is not present. Neither of the 2 controversial sentences.
Oh, that's weird. I
are
literally just
present in the document that we're looking at. Sometimes
well,
in
interesting.
Google Docs you can look at the history and you can go back and figure out what happened.
So
Hey, Nadia,
That
when
would
you
be a little
copy it,
boring.
you have to say specifically copy comments when you do that copy. So you might not have checked that box. It'll ask
I
you.
literally just right-clicked on the document and said, make a copy. That's all.
And what happens when you do that real quick?
I think there's.
It literally just makes a copy.
Oh, well, yeah, if you do it through the menu, the file menu, it'll give you a little bit of, says share it with the same people. And no, don't do it there.
Yeah, no, I won't do it now. Yeah. Okay.
And it'll also say, bring over comments, bring over all the correction, all that stuff.
Okay.
So if you do it from, so you might have lost it if you did it that way.
But what's weird is I just made so I can understand losing the comments. I can't understand losing the paragraphs entirely.
That is strange. I don't know why that happened either.
It's in the email, in the agenda document.
Okay, let me look at that one. Let's see.
Seemed like it was worth discussing, which is why.
Yes, no, that's exactly. I mean, I had it highlighted because I wanted to discuss it. So.
And there you go. Those 2 red paragraphs are missing.
All right. Well, let's take them. Ugh, not letting me copy just that. Another problem with the PDF. Any suggestions, folks, on how to copy this?
It also is in the Word that Sarah sent out.
Okay. I think I'm going to copy partial sentence, and then I'll go back and fix it afterwards, just for the sake of speed, so you're not all watching me struggle with my skills here. That goes here. Yes. Somebody tell me. Is it this paragraph or this one?
Other one. Yeah, after does not share the corridor. Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to paste for the moment. Okay. And we'll look at the full sentence over here so we can discuss it. Sorry, I seem to have lost it. Okay. So yeah, this was a line. Many XCAP members believe high-speed rail will never get to the peninsula, but until it collapses, we have to keep the passing track issue in mind. So I disagreed with that because basically Caltrain has already taken a position as a board and said that they are going to be assuming 4 tracks for all of Palo Alto. So whether we believe that that's an issue to keep in mind or not, they have said to us in the emails that any plans that we submit have to be able to show that it would not preclude the possibility of 4 tracks.
Well, as I wrote the sentence, obviously I'm in favor of including it. And whether it's many XCAP members or some XCAP members, the point is that that's what some of us believe. And the fact that the board may presently think that they've got to include the 4 tracks is covered by the say we've got to keep it in mind. But that's not a permanent decision by the board. And if it is, it will go to what Tony was saying earlier, that Palo Alto ought to be opposing the 4-track quite vociferously. This thing is 4-track is definitely not a done deal. And there's a lot more work that HSR will have to do if it ever is going to see a 4-track solution in Palo Alto. So I think it's quite appropriate for us to say that some portion of us believe that it will never get to the peninsula, but that HSR will never get to the peninsula. But we have to keep it in mind because it's still on there. It seems to me that's a pretty non-controversial statement.
For me, I believe that they would not come. I mean, they may come to San Jose and then we have to transport them up to the north. So that 4-track issue will be a Caltrain issue or a high-speed rail issue, but it won't go away. So my feeling is we should be opposing it mainly because it just doesn't fit well in our city. But I wouldn't say many XCAP members. I think it will come in some form or another. The volume will come through.
How about if we make the sentence agnostic? So it's not what XCAP members believe. It's just whether or not high-speed rail collapses or abandons its mission, we have to keep it in mind, period.
Well, we have to keep it in mind until we get someone to say we don't have to keep it in mind. I mean, right now, Caltrain, like you said, has made it clear that we need to address it, and we need to either convince them that that's not true or address it.
I mean, as someone who has followed high-speed rail for many years, I would agree that I don't think that high-speed rail is necessarily happening. But the part that I have problems with is I still believe that for a whole bunch of other reasons, they will continue to land bank the possibility there. They own the right-of-way. Rail right-of-way is something that is very difficult to get back once you've given it away. And they're going to try really hard to keep that possibility. They just will, because they don't know what they're going to need in 100 years. And so, my concern, we can certainly vociferously protest, and that might politically work out later. But I still think it's something that for right now is still
Nadia, you acknowledge elsewhere that Caltrain has said that absent high-speed rail, there's no need for 4 tracks anywhere in Palo Alto.
Agreed.
Right?
Yep.
So what's the controversy of saying it then? Then if they say that and high-speed rail goes away, what would be their justification for not giving Palo Alto that little bit of land, for example, at Churchill? What would that accomplish? That would mean that Palo Alto wouldn't have a grade separation?
I'm not so concerned about Churchill. It's more South Palo Alto I'm concerned about. I think they'll give us Churchill.
Same thing.
Yeah, I think South Palo Alto, there's more questions. And the reason is Dumbarton Rail. So the studies have not, if Dumbarton Rail manifests, and that has been put on pause, but if it were to come back again, they have not done studies on what happens there. So that's the reason. But look, I'm here to represent whatever the group wants to do. I was just uncomfortable with many XCAP members because I didn't know how many XCAP members. So if there's more than two, we can, we can do some, we can do many.
Can we
we
just
can
say there's uncertainty whether high-speed rail will get to the peninsula?
Yeah, that's what I propose. I'm just thinking we just leave it neutral because I don't think it's up to what we believe or what we feel necessarily about it. It's just that
Yeah.
rail and grade has to be addressed.
The whole
Yeah,
report
unless we
based on
voted
what
on
we
it,
believe.
we should be objective. So I'm agreeing with Larry's comments earlier. Like it's not the only opinions we should be expressing would be the things that we voted on, but I think everything else we should just be objective if we can.
Okay, so I'm sorry, Keith, you said something and I didn't hear it all.
Oh, it's just the XCAP members believe, I think, is unnecessary. There's uncertainty. There's uncertainty in XCAP. There's uncertainty outside. And concentrating on XCAP, I think, misses the mark. I think we're just saying there's uncertainty and just keep it simple if we don't need to get it complicated.
Okay.
You're comfortable with saying, Keith, you're comfortable with saying something like, there are serious questions whether HSR will ever get to, where's the language again?
Yeah,
I think there's a difference between saying there's uncertainty and saying there are serious questions. Saying there are serious questions means I don't like it. We're saying there's uncertainty is more neutral in my opinion.
Well,
and the other thing is that until it collapses or abandons, that's kind of loaded. I would just say until it changes. That collapse or abandons in San Jose.
If there's there is uncertainty if HSR will ever get to the peninsula, but we must address the, what did the other one say? I forget what it said.
Well, we have to address.
There's serious questions in Sacramento whether HSR can survive.
Yeah, of course, but
it's fact.
It kind of doesn't matter, actually. What matters is whether Caltrain is going to block anything we want to do.
Right, exactly.
That's what matters.
Yep.
Is what the Caltrain board believes, not so much what we personally believe. I think that's what Nadia is trying to say.
Yes. Is this sentence better? There is uncertainty if HSR will ever get to the peninsula, but we must consider passing tracks in our plans until we know otherwise. How's that?
I would leave out the word ever. Just a clarification from Larry or someone who might know this. As I understand it, the Joint Powers Board owns the right-of-way. And the Joint Powers Board is also the Caltrain board, but it's not High-Speed Rail or Caltrain that owns the underlying real estate. Is that true? And then if that's true,
the Joint Powers Board owns, the three counties together own the land, and Union Pacific has trackage rights agreements to operate.
Yes, so it's not Union Pacific who's doing this application, it's Caltrain. So isn't it
no, it's High Speed Rail is applying to use Caltrain's right of way. So the thing is, the debate that's happening, we could talk about it offline. I don't want to take the committee's time about it, but are we okay with this sentence as it stands now?
I am not, because it makes no. And let me say what, when you say, but we must consider passing tracks in our plans. We are not considering passing tracks in our plans. Well, everything we considered here is based on a 2-track system in Palo Alto. We have not considered passing tracks at all.
Yeah, I agree.
Boy, if that happens, it's a real
problem. I think we should say that, Larry.
Okay, so we must,
considered.
You had it as we must keep passing tracks in mind.
We have to address the fact that the Caltrain board believes that passing tracks are a possibility. And, yes. And that has a chance of throwing a wrench in everything we've planned.
Yeah, I mean, we have.
I don't know how to say that in report language, but
we have it down here.
Yeah, so maybe we just need to take it out of the top part and put it in the bottom part. I think the bottom paragraph is more clear.
This one over here.
All the designs is in which track system. Unfortunately, the Caltrain board is gonna
I mean, we cover this in the other section more, but I think what Larry said before. So how about I'll put a tickler here, Larry, that we can add to this a bit further, and we can work on some language, because I think it is really important that this part gets really highlighted in the executive summary in case they don't read the other section. But there was other text that was here was the other sentence. Let me move it over to where we were editing now so we can all see it. So my concern with this one is that it included things that we did not vote on as a group.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable saying XCAP does not recommend such a study, but obviously a new XCAP type study would have to be undertaken. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm okay with the first sentence, not the second. Anybody else?
Okay with that.
Okay, so I'm gonna. Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Nadia, in the paragraph before, it said never. There's another never up there.
Let me see.
In the
I don't. There's.
a little higher.
I did a word search. I don't see the word never.
Okay. All right. Okay. I thought I saw it, but
No worries.
Was
There's a
it
lot of-
never or ever, Tony?
oh, sorry,
We
it's
wonder
ever.
if it will ever.
Ever.
Okay, hold on.
All right, Tony, I'm not following you on that. Could you repeat? Sorry.
Something about will it ever make it to the peninsula? We're not sure.
Yeah, there it is. No, not there.
No, that's however. There's no. I took out the ever here. We have here. There's uncertainty if
That-
HSR will get to the peninsula. We took out.
Right. I saw that, but I thought there was another ever before or never.
There was, but I took it out.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, moving on to decisions, recommendations. If we miss something, you can always holler back. For Keith and Phil, I want to make sure that you guys are okay with these sentences.
Yeah, I'm fine with them. I read that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
fine. Yeah,
Yep.
Nadia, just so you know, I'm not trying to do the minor wordsmithing now because a lot of that can be changed by the time we do the final report.
Yes, thank you. I'm doing it just as I see it because I'm sitting here and I've already read this a couple times. So,
And somebody besides you has to do a lot of that because you've stared at this too much.
I've stared, yes, I've stared at many of the chapters. They're beginning to blur. I'm having dreams about them. That's how I know it's too much. Right, it doesn't seem like we have anybody objecting to these. What did you guys think of this section? The broad themes that emerged.
I don't feel super comfortable saying there is little to no enthusiasm, but I don't know what else to say. I mean, We-
I
We
I
knew
was
since we
wondering the
began
same
this
thing.
process that there was no easy answer that was
Yeah,
going to
well,
make everybody happy, and to no surprise, that didn't change.
Okay.
Yeah, I would rather say that among XCAP, we all recognize that every alternative has its negatives. That there's no alternative that stands head and shoulders above the others in terms of benefits. Something soften that a little bit.
Okay.
So we recognize that every alternative creates issues as well as having benefits.
Okay.
And there's
I thought it meant that we didn't find any alternatives that were compatible, or we didn't find any alternatives that made Palo Alto better.
well, I don't know if that's true, but what certainly is true is that every alternative had its issues.
How about, and there
That's
was no clear winner.
Yes.
I was
Yeah,
trying
there
to
you
get
go.
thought across here. That is, it's one thing to say that every alternative has its negatives, but sometimes in that situation, you have an alternative where somebody says, I think this is a great alternative and we ought to vote for it. And somebody's a champion. I don't think that there's any alternative that has a real champion.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's precisely our
And I think
problem.
right.
Larry, you
And I
hit
think
it.
that's
That's our problem.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how we
It's hard to get
recognize-
excited about any of the alternatives.
Yeah, ain't nobody jazzed about this. So we recognize every alternative has negatives. There was no clear winner and no enthusiasm for any particular.
Well, Keith was almost a trench cheerleader for a little while.
What was that?
Keith was almost a trench cheerleader for a little while.
Rah, rah.
Exactly.
No, I mean,
We're getting
I
our
do
trench
think that,
t-shirts out.
for the neighborhood, the trench makes a lot of sense, but there are challenges to it.
Yes,
There's no
yes.
secret to that.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we've known this the whole time.
Right. Nothing's changed.
I mean, I think the thing that's interesting is that during the XCAP process, no solution emerged that everyone magically said, wow, this is great.
Yeah.
And we may have to live with that.
Well, that's the point we want to get. I want to see us get across that there's nobody who's jumping out and saying, boy, if my alternative is not selected, I'm going to organize a referendum, or I'm going to go out and campaign. I'm going to live and die with this issue. There's no such person.
Yeah. Okay. Is
I
the
had
sentence
one
as-
comment on the number 2. The trench, tunnel, and underpass had serious flaws. Flaws to me sounds too permanent. I would either say serious challenges or currently had serious flaws. Because, for example, the underpass has some issues, but I don't think they're unworkable. But it's just the current design has some issues.
yeah, I agree with Keith. I think also the viaduct has the same problems as if it was fleshed out some more, there may be mitigations available.
Yeah, that was something I disagreed with on another chapter, which we're not talking about yet. Which is that we really didn't spend a huge amount of time on any of the South Palo Alto alternatives. And as opposed to like the traffic studies, for instance.
Do I hear a motion to extend XCAP for 6 more months? It is not kidding.
It
Better be not kidding.
I know.
may come to that.
Okay. So this is kind of an attempt at a list of things that are
Oh,
more.
Can I have one more comment here?
Oh yeah, please go ahead.
On number 3, the resolution of the 4-track issue is essential.
Yes.
That to me is too short, in that I think we have to point fingers here, in that whether we say getting Caltrain to resolve the 4-track issue is essential, right? Because really it's on Caltrain's board.
Well, I have mixed feelings about that. So I agree that it's Caltrain's job to figure out with high speed rail what they're doing. But I also agree with what Tony and Larry were saying, which is that um, if the Palo Alto City Council is taking a position on 4 tracks and they want to make that known, then they also need to get their act together and telling us, you guys don't really have to worry about 4 tracks because we are sticking to 2 and that's all there is to it. And so everybody needs to get on board with to figure that out.
I think it's not only essential, it's critical. I think we need to work on that now.
What if we say something like funds should not be spent until this issue is resolved? I mean, what's the critical hinge point, right? Is we shouldn't go further until that's resolved, right?
I wouldn't say that, because I think that there's things that they could do that is not necessarily grade sep work, but that is work that could further grade separations. As an example, looking at the new bike ped crossings that were in the comprehensive plan, is something they could work on regardless of whether there's 2 tracks or 4. It doesn't matter. You're going to need a crossing at Loma Verde and you're going to need one at Seal. And so I don't want to say you can't do any work, but it's also true that it's difficult to do any design work. Currently at any of the intersections, but particularly in South Palo Alto, right? I think that that's even more risky. You do it at your own peril.
Yeah, I think if you gave it like even just a phrase would be a little bit more. I know we're trying to keep it short, but I think that's what people are getting at, is that the critical doesn't capture it. So.
Okay. Any suggested verbiage from anyone? I'll buy it now.
Well, you just said it. You just explained it, Nadia.
Okay.
Right? You said, while money can be spent on XYZ type of things, they should, decisions like ABC should be postponed until.
Yeah, I think the more we talk about this, the more it's being clear to me that we can't resolve South Palo Alto without some answer on the 4-track and without a Caltrain-wide study, because nobody can afford any of the alternatives otherwise. And if we want to make a recommendation to council, it would be something along those lines.
Greg, I'm having trouble understanding you.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I agree with this. And I think that the more I hear this, the more I'm also thinking that there's talk of a corridor-wide grade separation study. And and I don't know where we're going to talk about that, but there was sentiment from the Caltrain folks that funding from wherever funding might come from would be easier to get for a corridor-wide project than for a single project in Palo Alto. And that all of these alternatives are way more money than we have. So. Well,
and I just want to say, so I'm going to take out, I'm going to take out what I added and put it as a comment, but previously we were told that we were competing against Mountain View and Sunnyvale for Measure B dollars. And so we had to sort of hurry up. And what I've been saying from the beginning is that the problem for Palo Alto is, without a resolution of what's happening with the 4 tracks, because some of our alternatives include moving the train, we are at a disadvantage because we can't move as fast as Sunnyvale and Mountain View, because their alternatives do not hinge on whether or not they have 4 tracks. They are not moving their train, they're moving their roads. And so on the one hand, we're fighting with VTA to say, hey, hurry up and don't take all of our money away. We're going to be able to work on this in the next 10 years. On the other hand, we're saying, hey, we can't really do any design work until we have an answer from High Speed Rail and Caltrain. And, the second part of that sentence is Caltrain and High Speed Rail have their own monetary problems, and the technical analysis and the work that needs to be done between those 2 agencies, I don't know how that gets funded, because neither one of them has funding to do that at this moment.
Well, plus we're not competing with Mountain View and Sunnyvale. We're competing with San Jose, it turns out, as Larry explained to us earlier.
Yeah, sort of, yeah.
Competing with BART.
Yes, exactly. And so I think that's the hardest thing here is that there's sort of mixed messaging generally. And frankly, I'm not sure how quick of a resolution, even if you pushed Caltrain to say, you guys really have to figure this out. Caltrain has no money right now, and neither does High Speed Rail. They simply do not have the funds to do those studies. And without that, how are we supposed to move forward? So Larry, I just left it as a comment here so you can think about what should get added.
Well, I think that we ought to consider also adding Tony's thought that this is not new to Palo Alto, though maybe Palo Alto sort of forgotten it, that the city has been in opposition to a 4-track system through town for, well, what's the time frame, Nadia? 2012, 11, somewhere in
Yeah.
there.
A long time. 2011, yeah.
And I think to put words in Tony's mouth that a 4-track system there would be a major disaster for South Palo Alto. That's why Palo Alto didn't accept the idea that high-speed rail first had, that they would build a 4-track system. That's what led us to oppose it and go to Congress, really, and the legislature. Palo Alto lobbied very hard in that period of time, 2011 to 14. And that's what led in part to the so-called blended track solution, the compromise that Anna Eshoo sort of brokered. Politically, Caltrain may have the authority, but Palo Alto is not without its weapons. So I want to get Tony's thought in there someplace, in several places, that our council going forward should be strong in any solution that requires any part of the community.
Okay, I added it as a comment here, so we can work on language to put that in. The question is whether that's a position that I phrase it as the city could consider opposing 4 tracks in Palo Alto, because I don't know that necessarily all of XCAP would agree, or frankly, that it's something that we know enough to sort of discuss as a group. But I think we can put it out there as something that, plant the seed for council that they can decide to go with it or not.
Well, maybe one way around it is to go back to the city's language and say that this would just be a reinforcement of existing policy, the council has already set.
Okay. I will note that the blended system that was brokered by Anna Eshoo and Joe Smidian and Rich Gordon actually was that they would have a primarily 2-track system with passing tracks in key areas. And so it's that further analysis that needs to clarify that this is really, where is that spot? So.
Nadia, there's another issue here, and that is that we have not studied the 4-track system. We've only worked on 2 tracks. And
yeah.
So we can't make any judgment about 4.
Right, and we say that, we just said that in the paragraph above. Where is it? Up here. Notably, all of the XCAP designs reviewed assume a 2-track system, and the impacts of a 4-track system was not addressed since Caltrain's policy decision was not shared with XCAP until April of 2020.
I mean, otherwise we'd have to go back to AECom or whoever and say, design us 4 grade separation opportunities that can be converted into 4 tracks. This is the kind of problem we deal with software engineering all the time, but not so much in actual physical engineering. So,
well, and I mean, the challenge is that, Caltrain sort of pulled a fast one and said, well, now it's up to you, City of Palo Alto, if you want to build a 2-track viaduct, you need to show us that it doesn't preclude the possibility of 4 tracks. Well, how are we supposed to know what the 4 tracks are supposed to look like when you haven't even decided where they need to be? I mean, it's a kind of catch-22, or chicken and egg sort of thing. Okay, so we'll come back with some more language around that, and I've captured those concepts there. Is there any other concept about this that we missed? So I have no spending money on grade SEP designs until we have answers. Palo Alto could consider opposing 4 tracks, and this is potentially a reinforcement of the city's existing policy on high-speed rail. Is there any other concept that someone wants me to capture here so that Larry and I can work on that? Okay. So this next section says, these are kind of general suggestions that were not super technical. And so question if the group feels like this is policy level sort of, it's generic enough.
I think
Yeah.
it's benign enough, or general enough that you.
I think as we look through, we might find enough things. There's Tony's suggestion of an urban designer. I think that I hate to say it, but more noise study might be necessary, given that we actually so far contradict ourselves in our reports about the impact of noise.
Okay. So noise study. I think the urban designer thing. So I agree that that's what we need, but that can only happen when they get to more refined levels of design is the problem. And so I think that falls more under the technical category, because once they've refined what they're working on, then that's when the urban designer kicks in. It's not a general high level policy thing of like, hey, let's get an urban designer to work on high level policy now of grade separations, because that's not when the time would be.
So Nadia, sorry.
Yep.
I think it's the opposite. I think the look and feel of a place is super important. And so urban designer should almost lead if you want to get bikes and peds and the slow moving traffic as well as fast moving traffic to intermingle well. So I don't think it's an add-on after everyone's done theirs. You come in and add some plants.
Tony, does the urban design folks fit into the bike ped circulation study?
It includes all of it, Nadia.
Right. And so what I'm saying is, could we maybe stick it in as part of this? In other words, the 2012 bicycle study, I didn't notice if it had urban design. I didn't know if they worked with an urban designer. Does anyone know? Philip or Ripon, you guys are probably more familiar with that document.
You're talking about the bike and ped plan?
Yeah, so the 2012 bike and ped plan that we have, I think it was done by Alta. Did they have urban design people as part of the bike ped study? I mean, is that an element of those kinds of things?
I mean, typically not. Okay. It's typically doesn't go to that level. It's, this is much more planning and conceptual at this point.
Yeah, but I think that's the reason why modern cities are so pedestrian unfriendly. I think you don't get that feel of, I want to spend more time here, except for small places. And then we rush through as fast as we can from these well-designed places to another well-designed place.
Well, I think the bike and ped plan is not intended to be like that type of document. It's more of like where do we need to have like bike paths and bike enhancements? Where are the areas of opportunity? And it's analyzing that kind of stuff, and that's what the bike and ped plan does.
No, I think we need to start there. Must start there, and then after that, you find out how it fits in very well.
So, do you have some language on what that might? Like, what if you were talking to a council member and you were urging them to, I mean, it's not just hire an urban designer and plan grade separations, because that would be awfully hard. So what are we really saying?
Can I send you some language on that?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm going to put placeholder here.
And I'm sorry, I don't know exactly what, Tony's trying to mean by urban designer for this, because frankly, the person, Alta, they are an urban, they are a firm that does urban design. That is what they do. And that is what they did for us and for the plan. So I'm not sure if he means a landscape designer or.
It's seeing how all of these pieces fit together to create a really nice place, right? I mean,
yeah, so I'm just saying that earlier your description, it sounded a lot like you were talking about more landscape architecture or landscape design. And
no, it's more than that. It's how the whole network will interact with each other. And that should be done holistically. And that's a horrible word, I know, but it's about meshing streets, cars, you know the story, streets, cars, landscaping, pedestrians, bikes, handicap
Right.
all together in a nice place.
So if you want to
Okay,
send me something,
so-
Tony.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
I can
I
do
think I want to step, I want to walk back from what I said earlier, because that is what we do with our bike and ped plan, and that is what Alta did for us
Yes,
as an
that-
urban design fan. So I think I misunderstood what you were asking for earlier when I heard we're talking about how the viaduct looked and all of that
no,
perception. So apologies for my confusion.
no, not the architecture.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I have concerns about items 2 and 8, and maybe on number 9.
Okay, let's pick one at a time. So start with 2.
Sentences, the lead-in sentences, among the things the city can work on in the near term include. Well, I don't see that where number 2 is an option. All the others, I think, are options. The city could do it, maybe not, but boy, they just have to participate in the corridor-wide grade separation study.
Well,
So,
they have the option not to, which is why I want to make sure that they do. I mean, that was what they have the, if they don't prioritize that and they don't make sure that council is getting constant reports back, then they don't, I mean, it's like any one of these other committees, right? And so I think it's going to be a step up from LPMG.
well, maybe we shouldn't say prioritize rather than active.
Okay. That's a great one.
On number 8, I don't understand. We've already had a noise study done. So what's of this?
Well, to start with, judging from the comments and some of the comments in some of those chapters that people wrote, people either didn't agree with it or didn't believe it. But there was also a commonly commented thing that we didn't do any noise study of the impact of noise beyond the first 2 rows. And we had many, many, many comments from the public that said, I don't want you to elevate the train, it'll spread the noise further. And we don't have anyone who actually is a scientist who understands noise who can tell us whether or not that's true.
So how about noise study addendum question mark?
There you
Well, then I
go,
think-
sure.
Yeah, I think also when we were considering the viaduct, Keith brought up the issue of sound walls at the viaduct that were not studied, and the sound guys said that it was not in their scope. So down the road, if that alternative is being considered, it should look at the sound studies of the walls next to the wheels.
So sorry, Tony, you're saying that the noise study did look at noise parapets on the viaduct.
They looked at that, but they did not look at the resonance of that. They just assumed that all the energy was absorbed, and that's not really not accurate. It's a small, and compared to a train, it's relatively small, but 3 dB is 3 dB. And they just assumed it was 0 because they said it was relatively small, and it's a hard number to come up with, and that's why they didn't calculate it.
Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of, if you look at journal articles, there's a lot of journal articles like in Hong Kong where people are modifying their current design that isn't that different than ours with concrete structures to try and reduce the amount of that oscillation.
Larry,
How are we going to resolve this idea that we're saying on the above on the 4-track issue that the city shouldn't be spending any more money, and then we're listing 7, 8, 9 things where they should be. We're saying they should spend some more money.
well, so groundwater and geotechnical analysis, they're going to need regardless of what they do, because they need to know what's in the ground and they need to understand, whether they're going to do a viaduct or they do an underpass or whatever, they got to know what's happening there. The Caltrain corridor study, they have to participate in. Formal structure for PAUSD and bicycle things is something they probably ought to work out anyway. The bike ped specific review of the impact of grade separations was actually something that was in the comprehensive plan. That's a line taken straight out of the comprehensive plan. And I know that the bike ped plan generally is up for review anyway. So it may be incorrectly, but my assumption is it'll be part of that. The two additional crossings, which would be mitigations for eventual construction, it doesn't matter how many tracks there are, those happen regardless because they go completely under the entire right of way. Negotiating with Caltrain and High Speed Rail has to happen. Create a framework for soliciting feedback from Stanford and businesses. You know, that is probably something we could use for on lots of things. I will note, I didn't put anything in here, but the county is actually now working on the 1985 land use agreement with Stanford and kind of revisiting all of that. I happen to be on the committee for that. I didn't put any of that in there, but that's an opportunity for the city to kind of look at more ways to work with Stanford. So I think I would agree, Larry, that 8 and 9 are probably the two that it's like, if we're not spending more money yet, if we can't agree to what that is, then maybe those two get put on hold.
Yeah, on the urban or the landscape architect, while I think that's a good idea, it seems to me it would occur further down the road when we have some alternatives that have been adopted by the council, at least, because right now I think it's just too vague.
I get where Tony's coming from. I mean, the problem is that you need to start from a good design place, because if you work backwards, it becomes too shoehorned. But I think, you know, the challenge is also financial at this point, frankly. And so that would be a great charrette.
Yeah, it would.
Future charrette, right? Now that they've got all the work that XCAP has done, I think that's a great future charrette.
I agree.
A new charity charrette for the future of grade
Charity charrette.
The noise study to me is something, I think it's more technical. Could we agree that maybe the noise and urban landscape things go into the technical suggestions rather than the policy suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, I could also put that in a different section. I would just hate to see the council, you know, make a decision on some alternatives based on assumptions about noise that aren't correct.
Okay.
And I fear that that's going to happen.
Okay. So I'll mark those two for the technical section, if that's okay with everybody. Okay. This is sort of our closing sentence to this, or closing paragraph to this section. I'm not sure it does it justice. I feel like the executive summary should end on some really poignant something or another. So I think Larry and I will have to think about adding a closing paragraph. I can't spell. Yep. Phil, were you going to say something?
No, forget it.
Okay.
I would say something that I saw it's already in place.
I think the closing statement should say that none of us are excited about any of them.
But that doesn't get us off the hook for making a decision or recommendation.
Right.
That's
maybe
I
a line
think
that
that's
says
why we
XCAP
exist.
measures.
If there were if there were alternatives that everybody could get behind, there would have been no need for XCAP.
I would be excited about a bicycle underpass at Churchill.
Yeah.
Yes, me too.
And also one on Seal. I'd be really excited about that.
Yeah, I'm more excited about those than the other things. Okay, so this next section is a section that we don't have a home for yet, but the concept is that this is our summary page of all of the findings and what have you. And so thinking about it, as you guys have written your Churchill section and your South Palo Alto section, as we have very specific suggestions, they should probably get copied into this section as well. And so maybe highlighting or something, some way to call out things that we need to make sure get repeated in this summary of findings, recommendations, areas of future study might be a way to do that.
I suggest we agree on the outline for this section before people start to do that work.
Okay. I think we discussed having one that's going to be kind of for policymakers and one that's going to be for technical. Yes.
Yeah. Also, Nadia, may I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Not knowing Google Docs, I don't know the answer. Can Google Docs create a table of contents?
I believe it can, but I'm not 100% sure.
Okay. The reason I'm saying that is
Yes.
in Word, it can, and that's been very useful for me when I've created large documents.
Okay.
And this is certainly going to fit that scale.
Yep. I think there's a way to do it, and it's basically doing that same thing of using the headings and whatever. And there's a view, I think, where you can show the, I can't find it now, but there's a way where you can
Yeah.
show it on the side, I think.
Yeah, I would
Might
say
be
that.
here. There
all
it is.
these-
Yeah,
Do you
there's
see it,
that.
Phil?
And then you can also, there are various plugins that will actually generate an
All right,
actual
yeah,
table
because
of contents in the doc, but you also have that.
You know, when somebody wants to pick up this report, read just the executive summary and then selected sections, table of contents will make that process a lot easier.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my future fantasy editor also creates hot links, just so you know. Partly because I have a little report envy. The rail corridor report that Tony worked on. I don't have a printed copy here, but it's a lovely 8.5 by 14, spiral bound with these lovely graphics. I mean, it's beautiful. And that's kind of what got me thinking of like, hey, we're going to need help to make ours look as useful as that looks, because, this is kind of the things that policymakers end up really looking at. Of course, those are the days when they printed reports, wasn't that long ago. So, okay, so this section has kind of just general. It starts off pretty general. That's why it's marked general, and then we can add the technical sections here. But the first section basically just talks about the comprehensive plan, the bike plan, and the rail corridor report, and how there was some language in those already supporting the ideas of additional crossings. And so I make reference to all of the things that are there. Anybody have any questions, suggestions, thoughts?
I think this is where we're getting
I
out
think
of
we
the
have to-
executive summary section and we're
Yes.
getting into something else.
Right. And that's what I'm saying. This is another section that is
Yeah.
now going to be findings, future areas of study, and additional
Yeah.
recommendations, whatever we want to call it. And so what we discussed before is we'll have one part that's basically for policymakers recommendations or whatever, and then a technical recommendations, right?
So Nadia, the noise study and urban design can go into this section.
Yeah. So let me add the technical section at the bottom. I have urban designer and then noise study, and I'll just put those as placeholders for now. But these will go under technical.
Maybe we should say a detailed noise study because we've done a noise study.
Detailed noise addendum.
Yeah,
we
we
might
can just
need
write
to-
a few sections. I mean, the biggest unanswered question in my mind was really how will it sound from farther away? Which I think that, a lot of people are concerned about.
And I got to be honest, I'm not sure that requires a whole study. It may just be somebody needs to put in there, by the time you've moved 100 feet away from the train, the decibel level drops to
That's
blah.
probably fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yep.
I have trouble using the word findings here because in in the sections on South Palo Alto and Churchill, we're making findings as well, making recommendations. And so what we're really talking about here is something a little different. Maybe we're, it's more like discoveries.
Okay.
Well, you talked about, for example, that we now know that the traffic that uses Churchill is using it primarily to go north.
Yeah.
That really a finding by us or something different?
Yeah, good question. And where does that live, right? I mean, just to catch everybody else up, Larry was asking me about this thing about findings, and I said, part of what I don't want to lose is having people really understand some of the things that we figured out after going through 3 different traffic consultants, which is how those roads are really getting used, right? And so, as Larry said, at Churchill, most of the cars are actually turning on and off of Alma at Churchill. They're not really going across. And then, for example, what we learned at Charleston is that the morning commute is basically folks coming from Mountain View and heading west towards, let's call it VMware. And in the evening, it's a reverse of that. And so that those, that the designs, as it turns out, probably should have considerations for the fact that that's the majority of the way the traffic flows. And where do you put those ahas so that future policymakers understand that those were some pretty big learnings? Another one for me, for example, was what a difference it makes when the bikes and peds can go under without having to hit a call button and wait for a traffic signal and then bunch up as a big group. And so if anyone can take a stab at if findings, I'm not sure it's discoveries, but Oprah calls them ahas.
So one discovery for me was that for intersections that allow all 12 movements, decrease quite a bit the amount of traffic that goes through the neighborhood.
Okay, let me start a discovery section here. Maybe we'll all take a moment to articulate those.
Yeah, Nadia,
Yep.
I did that old chapter 4, which was findings. Isn't that overlap considerably with what you're talking about now in terms of discoveries?
I didn't see stuff in there that related to that necessarily. I mean,
Well, no, agree, but like the points like the traffic movement to Churchill, that's both a finding and a discovery.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you're defining discoveries as things we didn't expect to see, or things that surprised us.
Yeah, or something that we want future folks to keep in mind when they think about these things that maybe before wasn't a very present thing for us, but then we came to understand what a big deal it is. Like another one is the significance of having bikes and pedestrians being able to cross the train tracks and Alma in a tunnel, right, for under the underpass alternative, and how that would change that experience.
So why don't we say that? Why don't we say that we learned some things that we didn't expect, among which were, and some of the findings were just confirmation, some were not.
Yep. Okay. So I'm just going to put it. Yep.
Can I interject to just double down on that word learn?
Mm-hmm.
Findings are a very specific thing,
Okay.
and I'm not sure that's what we mean here. But in my past in project management, we have used learnings as the word. And I don't know if discoveries is the right word. I don't know what to say about that, but it might be a helpful way for us to just keep our buckets straight. Learnings is something we learned, and findings is a very specific different meaning.
Carrie's better said what I had in mind. Actually, I'm thinking of the government or the military uses the phrase lessons learned.
Okay.
Yes, I like that. That's really good.
Yeah, because findings may also mean like, things that we decree to be true. So
I want some of those.
like, the president will have findings. Right.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay, so I just want to get out the few that let's see, bikes that okay, so a couple of lessons learned for you guys. Dictate them to me so I can put them in here. What's a big lesson you learned?
Not sure we all agree, but I think we sort of coalesced around a 5% grade for pedestrians. For bikes and peds.
Yes, good example, very good example.
Yep.
I would suggest that there's 12 movement intersections prevent or decrease the amount of traffic that has to go through neighborhoods. Yeah, cut through.
about grade separating bikes and peds from Alma and the train creates a safer environment. And greater efficiency at the intersection, right?
Maybe this is covered earlier, maybe in another section, but eliminating grade crossings eliminates train horns, which has a bigger impact on the noise than anything else we're talking about.
Right. So, yeah, let's see, building grade crossings eliminates train noise.
It doesn't eliminate train noise, unfortunately, but it does eliminate train horns.
Eliminate, thank you, train horns, giving bigger overall noise reduction. Okay, anybody else? Big things you learned, didn't expect to learn, were surprised by?
Well, some of the stuff with the underpass, and that really the time of travel from point A to point B is more driven by traffic lights than by traffic speed.
Time, I put time travel, but time to travel is more driven by traffic signal interruption, maybe?
Yeah, if you're driving across town, almost all your time, a majority of your time is going to be at stop lights as opposed to on the road.
Okay.
So
Yeah, it seems to me I remember some study that showed what happens if you drive on Embarcadero from 101 to El Camino, and if you do it at 30 miles an hour and versus 20 miles an hour, what's the difference in the time elapsed? And it was something like 15 seconds.
Oh,
Proving
wow.
the point.
Oh, okay. So Keith, did I get it right in that sentence? Time. Well, we can wordsmith it. Let's wordsmith. All this has to be wordsmithed.
yeah. And the point is that if you're trying to improve safety or improve bikes, slowing down traffic is not a showstopper.
Yeah.
Adding traffic lights is a showstopper.
Right. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, I think that's it. Yep.
I have one that I don't know if it's appropriate to say it here, but the Churchill closure, I think it says this, the Churchill closure moves the problem to other places. And I think you've said it somewhere else, so maybe never mind.
Yeah. I think maybe the lesson is how far it moves the problem, like how many more places are impacted than you would imagine necessarily, maybe.
Yeah.
That was a finding, that was a learning for me. Was anybody else surprised by the number of places? And I will say that the other traffic consultants had more places. Hexagon then reduced the number of places where they thought there was going to be impacts.
Right. I think it's we should flag that one.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead, Greg.
I was going to say something totally different, so I'm going to wait.
Okay. Okay, so Churchill.
So
Okay.
I was going to say, it feels like every time we talked about bike traffic, all the consultants we brought in weren't able to really imagine a world in which we have as many bikes as we have in Palo Alto.
Okay.
And, I don't know, it just feels like relying on outside experts to help us with bike traffic is not helpful, given that there are very few places in America that have the concentration of bikes as we have at Palo and Gun and probably a few other places.
Okay.
And I don't want to dig the consultants. I just feel like, it's an order of magnitude more bikes than traffic consultants really ever think about.
Yes, I agree with that. I don't think the traffic consultants or most of the consultants didn't understand the nature of the amount of bike and ped emphasis that we have in Palo Alto.
Yeah.
Well, and that the because it's not an all day thing. It's not like peak hour of rush hour of traffic, right? It happens at a very short amount of time, but the sheer number, and that's kind of what I tried to say up here, bikes that gather in large groups impact design in a way that is really hard to understand, but critical.
And it's something that, like, if a future traffic study is done, you almost have to tell them when the pandemic is over, where to stand and when to stand there. Because they're not going to believe you.
Right. Okay.
The other thing is that traffic studies are so vehicle centric.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
we don't know where the people are biking to. We know schools, but commuters. How many commuters go to Stanford each day? I don't think we know how many bike people go. And also just the level of service. That's all a vehicle concept. They don't evaluate that at all for bicycles.
Right. Okay. Well, we only have about half an hour, so we can either keep going through these. I wanted to give a chance to talk about some of the other major sections and kind of how that went, because we didn't really dive into details on that. So I don't know who wants to go first, Dave or Greg. I'm putting you guys as lead, or In Young, or.
Well, I mean, my section is, I think it's 60 pages long, and I tried to get rid of the last 20, but we weren't ready to do that yet. So I don't know how to tackle that.
Yeah, I think yours is on a good path. You just have a lot in that section. I read the part of the IBRIC report, which is the Infrastructure Blue Ribbon Committee that happened a while back, and they gave some direction to their groups when they were writing, and I'm going to try to dig those up and send those out to you guys, because it had some good lines in there about keeping in mind, who's reading this, and why sometimes, even though the temptation is to try to shorten it for readability, you really do need to keep some of the gritty details in there, because this is kind of the only place they're ever going to show up again. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Were there any particular things that you were getting stuck on, Greg, or that you had questions on, or you need help with, or?
Well, actually seeing this section helped, because some of what I was stuck on was there was stuff that you had written as part of the underpass chapter that I couldn't find a place for and left at the end of my doc. Yeah. And I now see that you've incorporated some of it in here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So the big remaining section is sort of, well, I guess I have two questions. One is, you have the long blow-by-blow history of the underpass project and the XCAP, which I almost feel like we ought to just make an appendix or a separate document and just leave it alone. Where, there was a proposal, and then AECOM did something and you didn't like what they did, and it goes on, and I think it's a good appendix. But the other thing is, in general, I feel like what I'm left with in that chapter is a very cut and dry, here are some things about alternative 1, here are some things about alternative 2, here are some things about alternative 3, and what we're missing is sort of something that a human could latch onto. It's almost like we need someone, like Tony and I tried to do, to write, look, here's why we think the viaduct is actually pretty good, and have someone, doesn't have to be Keith, say, here's why the trench is pretty good, and have somebody say, here's why the hybrid is pretty good. It's almost like maybe it's a terrible example, but when you get your ballot and there are all the ballot measures and there's the pro and the con, you know, it's almost like it's missing that. It's just all very, and I tried to make it as neutral as I could. And if you see down, you know, there's a section where we go through each option, we describe it in a very straightforward way, and then we have the hybrid advantages and disadvantages. But there's no, like, I feel like there needs an advocacy section. Like, you know, here's a couple paragraphs on why the hybrid is such a great alternative. And if we can't come up with that, maybe we should eliminate one of these alternatives before we're done with our process. So I'm even willing to take a crack at writing those, because I think I can put myself in the shoes of all the various people. But I feel like, you know, it's missing that human touch, and it's just a long list of pros and cons. And in fact, this is some of the stuff that's in it's in the after the end for now. This is in the not currently part of the report.
Yeah, Greg, I'd be happy to work with you on that.
Yeah.
Because the more we can shape the flow of the way people read the report, the better.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the arguments in favor of a proposition.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking of, exactly.
And then, of course, the negatives are the arguments against, and we'll have both. But something, and that should be, we might even have that in this executive summary.
Yeah, so yeah.
Precise enough.
And in fact, maybe that's what we need to do is if we go to the, can you scroll up a little bit on the nav bar on the left? Actually on the left bar, you see there is, like, I have for each one.
Pros and cons, yeah.
I have the pros and cons, but the pros and cons are very cut and dry. It's like before that. And yeah, maybe in the executive summary, we should say, you know, 2 paragraphs each. Viaduct, trench, underpass, hybrid. You might be considering the trench if you believe that X. You might be considering the viaduct if you believe that Y. I'm willing to take a crack at what that might sound like, but I feel like without that, this is just this massively long list of dense information that's not going to help anybody.
So I would totally be down with that, and it echoes what In Young I think was saying, which is that the executive summary in some ways should be a repeat of sentences that are also already existing in the report. And so kind of what I imagined, you may have seen in the underpass section that I wrote a little executive summary, 1 paragraph, right? That was basically like, here's basically the net on the underpass. It needs more work, right? It went through different iterations. It needs more work in this 5 areas. That's it. And I can imagine doing those for all of those. And then my thought was having copy pasting that exact sentence into the executive summary and having one of those for each of the different ones. So I agree. I that's kind of what I imagined.
So maybe I'll work. Right.
Go ahead.
So what I will literally do is I'm going to create a draft B of this because I've locked this down. No one can edit it anymore unless you've created a new thing, and add that section in. And maybe people could send comments over the week in email. I guess they have to go to Sarah. But I mean, basically, I'd like to find a way to incorporate changes into this and then, you know, kill the last 10 pages.
Well, you could have up to 4. There could be 4 of you working on this. So if you want to, if you have 3 buddies that are willing to work on that one, and then the rest of the group, how many? There's 9 of us. Another 4 basically could work with Dave Shen to do the same thing for the Churchill alternatives, right? So
one of the suggestions I wanted to throw in before we get too far down this path is, I like the idea of advocacy. I'm not sure I feel comfortable with advocating for the specific alternatives. I guess in my mind, I kind of wanted to advocate for what might be best for each kind of constituency group. And maybe we can do both. I don't know, but I would love to know, or for council to know, and that was kind of the point of the matrix that we were talking about, like, how can we talk about what would be the best for bicyclists? How can we talk about what would be the best for pedestrians? How can we talk about what would be the best for other interested groups? So I don't know if that's something we can also think about, or if it's either or what, but I wanted to throw that out there.
Well, Carrie, let me extend on that idea a little bit. If we're going to do that, we should define a list of constituencies up front, and then that would give us a framework to work with.
I
Yeah.
would like to do that. I mean, I threw some ideas out there, but I think if we took 5 minutes as a group, we could complete that.
Exactly. It's not a big deal. It's just a question of doing it.
Okay.
And
Well,
we're not
it
going to
gets
get
a little it gets a little sticky though, because for example, on the underpass, some bicyclists love the underpass and some hate it.
Well-
And so there's a little,
Yeah, Keith, no, there's no question about it. This is not a panacea, but it's a way of focusing the discussion around impacts to specific groups. And it's possible the impacts will be mixed. But I'm sure the council in political terms thinks about constituencies. This probably helped them a little bit. Like one constituency can be homeowners whose properties abut the tracks on the west side of Alma. Another might be commuters who live in Palo Alto or even out of Palo Alto. And people can be part of more than one constituency.
I think I would agree that I think it's helpful to think of those voices when writing the short blurbs that Greg is thinking about. But I don't know that we have to go through the trouble of with each one of those saying and for bikers and for peds and
Yeah,
for
well,
commuters, right?
and,
And
you know,
so
we can make this as formal as we want, but even if we just keep this list in mind as we're writing, that helps. As long as they don't have too many, 5 to 7 is usually a good number of constituencies, in my experience.
Mhm.
More than that, things break down a little bit.
because I do worry about representing, for example, at Southgate, right? There's some people feel very strongly one way, some people feel very strongly the other way,
Yeah.
and they're all in that same neighborhood.
And you could break it down. You could really micromanage this to the point where
Right.
it becomes an exercise in writing.
And we do have to include that there are differing opinions one way or the other. So I don't think we're going to escape the tensions there. We do need to convey that to the council.
Yeah, the value of this list is it's a reminder.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree.
So, and that's, if we just keep it as that, that's help. So we don't forget to think about the impact on peds or by the way, drivers in general. Well, maybe commuters captures that.
Does anyone want to volunteer for specific groups at this point? We should look at the schedule too to figure out what we have coming up next. Let me grab the.
Yeah, and that's a good point, Nadia. Given you mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, the deadline we had, which I think was January 25th, if my memory holds,
Yes, that is the proposed one at this time.
then it might be useful to map out working backwards from that, just to see if that's a realistic deadline or not.
Yeah, I would agree. And we also have the issue of, we have a meeting next week on the 9th and then again on the 16th. And then after that, we have the holidays, which both staff and the rest of us probably would like to be able to take a break.
So what's the next meeting after that?
Hold on, let me grab my phone, or unless one of the city staff has the schedule.
Jan 6th, Wednesday.
I think it's Jan.
Are you talking about the meeting after the meeting for council or the meeting for XCAP?
Well, XCAP really only we have the December 9th and December 16th, and then we don't have a meeting on the 23rd and we don't have one on the 30th because neither you guys aren't working either, correctly? The city is closed, I'm assuming.
Yep.
And then we have January 6th and we have January 13th and we have January 20th. And presumably if our documents have to be into staff on the 25th, that only leaves us 4 meetings. And that's a turnaround each time. So I'm not sure we're going to hit these dates.
Yeah, by the way, I would question the assumption that we won't do any work after December 16th and before January 6th. Staff may not be around, but we may be all working at home and maybe communicating, subject to Brown Act, of course.
Right. I mean, I think that's
Just noting, I will be available and working. I don't think we can host a XCAP meeting.
All I'm trying to say is that as I'm listening to this discussions, we're going through this process. Again, I hate to be the gloomer doomer here. I'm just not sure we have enough time.
I agree.
And if we need to reset the schedule, better to reset it now than to reset it on January 24th. That's People hate it when you do that at the last minute.
Mm.
They're much more understanding when you tell them a month in advance, we need an extra month, if that's the case.
Yep. Well, and I'm still holding out hope that Ed for Christmas is going to give us a copy editor.
Yeah, but Nadia, hope is
I
not
know.
a strategy.
I know.
And hope is not a business plan.
Well, if we don't get one, I think we're even more likely that this is going to get pushed out, right? If we somehow.
So I think, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you
No,
off, but I
it's
think that, you know, what Nadia and I had discussed, and sorry, Nadia and Larry and I had discussed was not that, you know, the world's going to end if we don't get it in on this date, but that was going to be our target. So I think, you know, ideally we set a target so that we have a kind of a placeholder on the council meeting, because otherwise I'll tell you, the council meetings will just fill up, and the further, you know, we'll just keep getting pushed further out. So it's best if we can have a meeting that we're holding. If we set out our schedule and we find that XCAP is not going to be able to finish before then that's when we bump it. So
Philip, I would just, let me just present my concerns here. If we wait till like right before the council meeting, they'll be furious at us because they haven't discussed other issues. It might be too late to put other things on that council meeting agenda to use the time productively. And we look kind of stupid in front of them. If we tell them now that we want a date, I'm going to throw out a date, early February. I'm sorry, early March. I hate to say it, but I will. And we hold that date, we get a certain amount of credibility. And we don't have to try. And if we wait till the last minute to try to schedule, to your very point, we might not get on the agenda for months, given all the issues around COVID that they have to deal with.
So here's a question for
Again,
the
I
group.
hate to be the gloomer doomer here.
No, it's okay. I think it's useful. You know, part of our challenge is getting out the draft. So we're going to break now. For example, we just got a bunch of feedback. Larry and I will continue to work on the executive summary. I have comments that I can give to both Greg and to Dave offline so they can continue to kind of work on stuff. But what I see is that if every Monday, in other words, we have our meeting next week on Wednesday. If by Monday at 9 a.m. on the 7th, we can all turn in whatever other edits and suggestions and stuff that we have, then Sarah can put those out, and that gives us time to read it before our meeting on the 9th. And we'll need to do that for the next 2 weeks. And then the question is, if over the holiday break, you know, the challenge is the Brown Act. So question Philip about whether staff might be able to help us get an agenda out for a meeting that isn't happening, but at least we're making documents public so we can then swap groups and be able to continue to edit while we're still releasing documents.
yeah, so let me check in with legal and see you know, what they can do. And I'm sorry, I just want to respond to Phil's concerns. Phil, I would never let the XCAP end up on like a published agenda or anything that council knows. So I was, you know, the plan would always be to move before, you know, as soon as we know we're not going to make it. And so in reality, you know, by the end of this month, we could decide, or XCAP could decide, that it's not going to have it ready by the end of the following month. And that's enough time that it's not going to affect anything.
All right. Yeah. As long as we preserve our flexibility and preserve our credibility with council.
Yep.
Those are my real concerns.
Yep.
May I change the topic a little bit?
Yeah.
Dave and Young and I think spent a good deal of time on what you're referring to as Dave's chapter. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but I think we're ready to have the full group take a look at it and provide their edits. And I think we have a document that would respond to some of the concerns that Greg raised. We don't have just a listing of pros and cons. We do have try to some advocacy in some places. And one of the things we need to resolve is that on Churchill, we have a dissenting opinion, and how we're going to incorporate that is an interesting question. But anyway, I would hope they would agree that we're next meeting, fire away at us and see how far we can move on that, getting it close to final.
In the meantime, if we have suggestions, do I need to send a Word doc to Sarah? Because there's still one thing that I think is missing from Dave's chapter that Larry and Young worked on.
Well, there's only been 3 of us, so there's one more can join the team. You're volunteer. Why not?
Greg's got his own chapter he's been in.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to do any more work on the safety chapter, so I'm happy to.
Yeah, you're done with safety, I think.
I can go from 2 to 2 if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I did take a look at it. I don't know if anyone I have a couple of thoughts already on the Churchill section. So I think we need a bit more detail on the mitigations is listed as one giant bullet of mitigations. And I know that we have like several pictures of, the new intersection at Kingsley and High. I think each of those.
I didn't mean to start the whole discussion because I think it'll obviously go more than 10 or 15 minutes, which is all the time we have left.
Yep. So I think the best thing, I agree, Larry. I think it's fine. We can focus on you guys next meeting if that's what you guys want to do. The question is, what's the best use of everybody's time between now and then? And how does everyone want to group up? So is there anybody who wants to work with In Young and Dave? How do you want to do this, Larry? What were you thinking?
Well, to somebody who volunteers, we have one slot left. So
I don't really want to work on that doc. I would like to see it reflect some of the positive attributes of the bicycle underpass, which I can do by emailing somebody 2 paragraphs and saying, please consider this.
Yeah, that's okay because it's already been published.
Okay.
It's already been published.
Yeah, I can send my comments offline.
Yeah, we're okay.
I can also send my comments offline. What I'm going to work on before our next meeting is I'll work with you, Larry, on this executive summary and kind of clean that up and then maybe turn that other section into another document. I've also went back and we made a bunch of edits, but we didn't really clean up the other documents. So I've been trying to clean those up as well. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm working on.
I wanted to get in a word on about the interest group stuff. I'm glad to see how it works out, but I must say I'm skeptical. And I also worry that there's a particular group that's been left out, which is called the general public. Because the decisions shouldn't be made just how they interact with particular interest groups. The council is charged with the responsibility of looking out for the entire community. And just because something is good for one interest group, it might be not good for the city as a whole. So I don't want us to lose that perspective either.
Yeah. I agree. I think the constituents are particularly useful when thinking about designs and trying to assist in designs if there's special needs of certain groups. But I worry about making any blanket statements of like, well, if you're a homeowner, you're going to love the closure versus the viaduct, because there may be some people who like the viaduct even though their home is there. So that's hard to parse. Okay, so Tony and Carrie, I know you guys got your edits in today. You guys are sort of done with your section, or is there any particular group that you'd be able to glom onto? And what is your availability?
Well, I was thinking about trying to help out with your copy editing stuff, but I'll go wherever you want me.
Okay. Well, let's hear. Tony, I know you've been super busy.
Yeah, Nadia, my plate is really full here with my businesses stuff and COVID and all kinds of stuff.
Okay.
So I'm really full, and I'm not a good writer anyway. You're gonna have to rewrite the whole thing. So sorry.
Okay, we'll take your help continuing to edit. Tony, do you think then you might be able to at least take a look at some of the sort of other sections?
Sure, to review them.
Yeah,
Sure.
whatever feedback you can give, even if it's just a few comments to either Greg or Dave would be helpful.
Will do. I can do that.
Great.
And I'll send you the roundabout idea and the urban designer language.
Great, awesome. Carrie, I think if you're available to help, Greg, you have a slot on your group, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with that doc is organization. I feel much better about it since I spent a bunch of time on it last weekend.
Yep.
What I'm going to do is write an executive summary, and again, there's stuff at the end that I'm like really this close to deleting. But maybe a better, I think the thing we need most of all is a look at the sections of that doc and where they duplicate things from other docs, and start imagining how we're going to pull this together into one single report, like a number of people like Kim Young, I think, commented earlier. And that's something that, if Carrie has time, starting to imagine that possibility, or even being familiar enough with the other docs, so when they look at the one I'm working on and say, oh, this duplicates something, then we can confidently eliminate it.
And that might, that'd be great. And that might also come sooner once we start to look at them a little more together. I mean, the problem is right now we're all still in our section, but yeah, I can try to flag for you the stuff that's a repeat. You could probably even see what is exactly a repeat.
I can see some of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right. And did anybody else read my underpass section? And what did you guys think about Greg's thing about making that its own appendix, or does it go in the main story of underpass?
The thing is, we don't have like the story of the other alternatives.
Right.
We only
Well, there
have the
isn't much of a
the
story.
underpass.
Yeah.
Right. And at one place, the point, the underpass thing, you said, oh, well, we didn't spend as much time on this as we did on the other alternatives. And I kind of feel like in South Palo Alto, we didn't spend much time in any of them. So it's just that the other ones don't have a story. The story is AECOM designed it and we talked about it.
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe when Carrie takes a look at that, because Carrie helped me with the underpass section, you guys can sort of decide like what is appropriate and what isn't. And I am part of your group, so I'm still available to help with that.
Okay, so I will create a new Google Docs and share it with y'all.
Right, it's because it's you, Keith, me, and Carrie. Is that right? Or is Phil? What are you working on?
I'm kind of floating at this point. I mean,
Okay.
I will respond to any requests, but I think the bulk of my original creative writing is behind me. I kind of hope it is, actually. After that chapter 4, it kind of convinced me we need to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Nadia, which chapters did you want me to look at?
Well, you're going to write a blurb on your Embarcadero roundabout that fell to the side.
Yes.
And then you were going to give me some language about what you mean by an urban designer.
Right. No, those two I know, but you mentioned reviewing.
Oh yeah, if you can look at what Dave and Larry, for example, have put out on the Churchill section, just kind of read through and see if you have thoughts on, does that capture what we've talked about? That would be useful.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay, so I don't think we need to have any. I might be producing stuff that will be going out on a Monday agenda so that you guys can maybe read it by Wednesday, because it'll be a cleanup of the executive summary and some of the other ones. I think the rest of it we might have to go through real time unless you guys think you can get something out by Monday morning.
I don't think Monday morning is unrealistic for me. I'd rather do it then than another time. I just got to figure out when.
All right, so that's the goal then, is Monday 9 a.m. so that we can all swap versions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the South Palo Alto has enough work to do that we certainly can get an improvement done by Monday morning.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Nadia, let me just jump in and say that if somebody needs me to do some work with them, give me a day or two lead time and I'll be happy to do it.
Okay. Okay.
as long as they get some lead time.
All right. I think that's it then for this week. Thank you all for your continued work, and cross your fingers on a copy editor.
Nadia, we do need to think of plan B in case we don't get a copy editor.
I know. I mean, we are you're looking at it. We are all the plan B. I present to you
Well,
plan B.
But no, then in that case, we ought to embrace the hot anvil and just figure out how many weeks and by what process we will be a plan B together, allowing for Brown Act restrictions.
Yep. And
Maybe that means more frequent meetings. I don't know.
I mean, I don't think we can do more frequent meetings. I don't think staff can do more frequent meetings. We're already meeting weekly. We're meeting more often sometimes than
Yeah, but
council. I
the
feel like.
staff need to be present at our meetings.
They have to, because we have to publicly broadcast them for Brown Act reasons.
But
right?
does that
So
mean
we
that
can-
Philip and Ripon need to be physically at the meetings?
Well, yes, they have to help. Sarah has to help with the broadcasting. So you guys could have subcommittee meetings. So in lieu of a full XCAP meeting, each of the subgroups could meet, and you guys could hammer out things that way.
And
So
can we do
could,
that in compliance with Brown Act?
as long as
Yes.
we're not crossing across groups? Yes.
All right. Well, because I've got a
Do
bad
you guys? So here's a
getting a
question.
budgeted copy editor.
I think so. If we wanted to do that, and we could skip a meeting, we would have the next. We could skip next week's meeting, but that means each group would have to work for something very final to be able to give to everybody at the following week. But I'm not sure that is going to really get us there. I think that might be something we might have to consider going forward, but I don't think we're there yet. Let's see what we do over the next 2 weeks or up until December 16th. And then from there, we'll be able to plot a course, I think, forward once we see
Okay.
how far we get.
I would just like to offer the observation subcommittees may want to do Zoom meetings among themselves as part of a working process, not just email and Google Docs.
Yeah. And if
Yeah.
anybody has trouble, my husband has a Zoom account, which I can finagle with him if someone doesn't have Zoom and can't do that.
Oh, by the way, I figured out a trick. I've worked out how you can have a Zoom meeting of 4 people on a free account for more than 40 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay. Don't tell anyone on this broadcast because
Does it involve everybody dropping off every 15 minutes and changing their phone number?
No, it's much simpler than that, but I'll tell everybody privately.
But
It's been proven to work.
I don't know if really time, especially between now and Monday, for more meetings that take place during the working day.
Right.
This is pretty much the maximum middle of working day meetings I can have in my life at this point. So the more we can accomplish asynchronously, the better it is for me.
Yeah, I'm sort of in the same boat at this point. I also want to acknowledge that there's only so much we can all edit and look at daily, because as someone who over the last 48 hours has tried to read 4 of the different chapters at the same time, it really just becomes mush. Because you start to swear you've heard it before, but you can't remember where, and you don't know which, like it gets lost easily. So I think we also have to give ourselves a little bit of human space to be able to kind of read and go back and then read again. So.
Okay. So did we agree who was in the groups for the different parts of the doc for the next couple of days?
I think we're basically staying in the existing groups with Carrie helping you now. And is somebody else going to go to Churchill or?
What if we split 4 and 4, since Tony said he was unavailable right now, and then split the work into 2 parts? We have, discrete chunks right now, but we can give half to one group and half to the other. So it would be a slight increase in scope, but it would allow us to kind of do our edits as a group.
Sure, but
instead of just having one chapter.
Yeah.
If your goal is to get towards a document that can be merged, you can get half that way in 1 week if you do half, 4 and 4.
Right. I think the challenge is that it's from a subject matter perspective, like you're either doing the Churchill document or you're doing the South Palo Alto document. And I'm basically working on.
I was doing a different document, and you were doing a different document.
Right, but I'm saying now you're working with Greg, and I'm also in Greg's group. So we've got the 4 there. It's you, me, Greg, and Keith.
So we can pull all that content in, I'm saying, for all 4 of those people and get closer to our consolidation goal and do our edits together and all that stuff we were worried about. Potentially, it's just an idea. I know we only have a couple minutes left, so if it doesn't make sense, we don't have to do it.
No, it's okay. I'm not sure I'm following.
Okay, I'll take it offline.
Okay, all right. Okay, but otherwise, since, yeah, I think Carrie's point is a good one, though. It's Tony is the one who's not available this week. So Phil, if you are able to work with Larry and In Young and Dave, then that would
All right,
be,
yeah, I'll be happy to just set up a meeting time or set up a process. I'll be happy to do it.
well, you've just got to review the what was made public today, the version that was made public today, and give your suggested edits.
Okay, and that's on the Meadow
On the
Charles.
agenda? No,
on
on the church, it's the Churchill, it's on the agenda.
The church alternative.
Mhm.
Nadia, my difficult time ends the first or second week of January.
Okay. So all of February is for you, Tony.
Okay, and not just again, I'm not trying to be super picky. Who am I working with again on this? Because
Dave, In Young, and Larry.
okay, good. I just want to make sure.
Yep.
Got to write it down, otherwise I might forget it because it's all mushing together.
No worries. And the name of the chapter is chapter 3.2, Grade Separation Alternatives, Churchill from Member Shen. So you'll see the one that's from me is accidentally labeled the same way. And presumably, guys, you can now put that into your section, and then it's, that way it's
All
part of your
right, so I'll take a look at it tomorrow sometime.
Great.
Do a Google, but I'm also going to suggest an edit rather than edit so other people can follow. That's probably something we should all do, put in comments and then agree on the comments and then lock it down.
Okay, I'll let you work with the group to figure out what's the best way to do that.
All right.
All right, anybody else?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Chair. Do you have any estimated cost for the that way we know what is expected when we are asking for it? Have
I'm
any
sorry,
expected cost, or do you know what the estimate is?
you're cutting out, but I think you're asking about estimated costs. Do you mean of a copy editor?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, I've had 2 different numbers thrown at me, and I don't know which is which. And the folks that worked on iBrick did so in 2013, so I'm not sure that they're the best people to ask. One number was 10,000, and another one was 20,000, but I'm not sure who's right and what the final number was. And so I could certainly, we can talk offline since I have a lead on somebody, and so maybe we can figure out how do they price it. Is it priced on number of words or number of chapters, or I don't even know how that stuff gets decided.
Okay.
So
Let's talk about it. That way we can get a little bit
Yeah.
better idea on the funding.
yeah, you shoot me an email and I can I'll send you what I know.
I'll follow up. Thanks.
Great. Anybody else? All right. Thank you, guys. Any questions, just hit me up.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.